I'd been on the road for 3 weeks when I decided to take the long way through the Appalachians. It wasn't the kind of trip I'd planned. Not exactly. I'd been heading toward Asheville, maybe beyond, just trying to clear my head after the kind of year that leaves you restless and quiet inside. I told myself I needed trees, fresh air, distance. But if I'm honest, I think I just needed somewhere I could stop hearing my own thoughts echo. The road that afternoon wound endlessly upward. Thin, uneven asphalt threaded through miles of forest that looked more like shadow than trees. The GPS signal cut in and out, so I relied on an old paper map I'd picked up at a ranger station near Silva. It looked hand-drawn, little green ridges, dotted lines for trails, a few campsites marked with tiny red triangles. One caught my eye, a place labeled Ash Grove Camp. I'd never heard of it, and I couldn't find any mention online when I tried earlier that morning. But it was marked clear as day about 12 miles off Route 281. I should have known better. The thing about paper maps, sometimes they don't match the land the way they should. The turnoff was barely visible, just a narrow gravel lane hidden behind a break in the trees. My tires cracked over it, and the forest seemed to swallow the sound of my engine as I climbed. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to close in, branches hanging low, sunlight stretched into long gold strands through the canopy. I kept expecting to pass a sign or another vehicle or some proof that I wasn't alone. Nothing. When I finally found a flat clearing big enough to park the RV, it was nearly dusk. The space looked almost prepared. Level ground, an old picnic table split down the middle, a rusted fire ring still half full of ash. I stepped outside, stretching, breathing in the thick, resin-sweet air of the woods. The smell reminded me of old cabins, damp moss, and something faintly metallic. I told myself it was peaceful, but it wasn't. There's a quiet in the Appalachians that doesn't sit right, like the forest is listening, the kind that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. As night came on, the fog rolled down the ridge like smoke, curling through the trees. I set up a small fire and cooked a can of chili, the kind of meal that tastes better than it should when you're alone. The flames danced low, orange against the gray. The woods pressed close. That's when I first heard the static. At first, I thought it was the wind, that kind of dry hiss that moves through pine needles. But then it sharpened, almost electronic. I realized it was coming from the small weather radio I'd left on the counter inside the RV. The volume knob hadn't been touched. It was just on. I stepped back inside. The air felt colder than before, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. The radio crackled, the same looping burst of static again and again. Then, faintly, behind it, a voice. It was too low to make out at first. Then I caught fragments. Silver Pines. Warning. Frequency. Stay clear. It repeated, like an automated message, until it distorted into white noise again. I turned it off, but the sound seemed to hang in the air, a faint hiss that didn't quite end. I stood there in the silence that followed, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the forest was bouncing signals, maybe I'd picked up a weather alert from another county. But that name, Silver Pines, stayed with me. I'd heard it before, somewhere I couldn't place. Maybe a blog post, maybe an old campground story, something about a place that didn't exist anymore. I stepped outside again, half expecting to see headlights or a ranger's truck, but the fog had grown thicker, muting everything into shades of gray. The fire was almost out. The smell in the air had changed, sharper now, like wet metal. That was the moment I realized the trees had shifted. I know how it sounds, but they weren't the same shape as before. The clearing that had seemed circular now felt narrower, the line of trees closer to the RV's door. I told myself it was the fog or my eyes adjusting, but something in my chest twisted. I packed up the fire ring and went inside, locking the door. For a long time, I just sat at the small table, staring out through the condensation on the window. I tried checking my phone. No service. I opened the paper map again, tracing the red triangles, trying to find Ash Grove Camp. But under the dim RV light, the name looked different. The ink seemed lighter, smudged, like it had been erased and redrawn. The heater kicked on with a loud click, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. That's when I noticed the smell again, stronger this time. It wasn't the RV, it was coming from outside. A metallic, sour scent like rust and rain mixed together. Then came the tapping. At first, soft, just a fingertip rhythm against the back window. Then a pause. Then again, slow, deliberate. I turned off the lights, heart hammering, and stood in the dark. The tapping stopped. The woods outside were still, fog pale against the glass. Then I heard the static again. Faint, somewhere outside. It came in little bursts, like someone twisting a dial just out of range. The same broken voice tried to form words, but they didn't sound like speech anymore. More like a breath trying to imitate language. I sat there for hours, or maybe just minutes. Time lost meaning. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke, the fog had thinned, pale morning light cutting through the windows. The forest looked ordinary again. Birds, wind, dew. I almost laughed at myself. I stepped outside to breathe, to shake off the fear. The ground around the RV was damp, but what caught my eye were the prints. Small, circular impressions in the dirt, not boot tracks, not animal. Perfectly spaced, like someone had been walking barefoot in the mud, heel to toe, in a slow, looping circle around my RV. And on the picnic table, something waited, a strip of torn paper. I picked it up. It was a piece of the same map I'd been using. But the ink looked wrong, darker, newer. A single word scrawled in pencil across the center: Silver Pines. I stood there for a long time, holding that strip of paper between my fingers, watching the wind try to pull it away. It didn't make sense. The map inside the RV was still folded on the counter. I hadn't touched it since last night. Yet here was a piece of it, torn cleanly along the edge like it had been cut out on purpose. The handwriting looked rushed, uneven strokes, almost frantic. Silver Pines. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees, half expecting someone to step out, maybe a ranger, a hiker, anyone who could explain how this ended up here. But there was only the quiet and the sound of dripping dew falling from the branches. The prints around the RV were already softening under the sun, but they were still there. A full circle. Like someone had walked around me all night, pacing slow enough to leave even marks. I tried to tell myself it was just a prank or some local kids messing around, but the nearest town was 20 miles downhill. And I hadn't seen a single vehicle since yesterday morning. When I climbed back into the driver's seat and started the engine, it stuttered, like something in the fuel line didn't want to wake up. I turned the key again. It caught, barely. Every instinct told me to get off that ridge. But when I tried to retrace the gravel road, something was off. The turns didn't line up. The same fallen tree I'd passed the day before now lay in the opposite direction, its bark freshly split, as if it had just come down. The road itself felt different, narrower, bending in ways it hadn't before. The paper map on my passenger seat didn't help. I followed it as best I could, but within 15 minutes I was staring at a junction that didn't exist on the page. Two diverging paths where there should have been one. I shut off the engine, stepped out, and stood in the middle of the lane. The forest was so still it made my ears ring. From somewhere up the ridge, faint but distinct, came that static again. It was too far to be the radio this time. It carried through the air like a signal trapped in fog. Soft bursts, then silence, then a warped rhythm that almost resembled breathing. I don't know why I followed it. Maybe because I couldn't stand not knowing. Maybe because by then I already felt like I'd been erased from wherever the map said I should be. I walked uphill, keeping the RV in sight through the trees. The static grew louder, then broke off entirely. I waited, listening, heart pounding. Then a new sound. Not electronic, not natural either. A voice. Hello? It was a man's voice, distant but clear. I froze. He sounded maybe 100 yards away, somewhere higher on the slope. Hey, you all right? I called back. Silence. Then, faintly, the same voice, same tone, same inflection, repeating my words. Hey, you all right? Like an echo that wasn't one. I took a few steps backward, eyes fixed on the tree line. Then came that smell again. Rust. Wet iron. It drifted down the windless air, heavy and sharp. Something about it turned my stomach, not because of what it was, but because it reminded me of something I couldn't place, a memory that didn't belong to me. When I turned back toward the RV for a moment, I didn't see it. The fog had thickened, dense enough to erase everything but the nearest trees. The clearing was gone. The direction of the road was gone. I could feel panic pressing at the edges of my throat, but I kept moving, using the faint sound of dripping water as my guide. Eventually, the fog thinned and the RV reappeared like a pale shape through the haze. I stumbled back inside, slammed the door, and just sat there, gripping the wheel, waiting for my heartbeat to slow. Then, I saw the paper again, the torn piece I'd left on the counter. Except now there were two. Identical size, identical tier. The new one had a different word scrawled across it, written in the same frantic pencil marks. "You're not on the map." I think I stopped breathing for a few seconds. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. But then the radio clicked on again by itself. The same weather radio, though I hadn't touched it since last night. Static. Then a pause. Then that same phrase repeated like a broken loop. Silver pines, frequency lost, remain calm. And then underneath it, another sound. A whisper, so faint I had to lean forward to hear it. "Turn around." I froze. I didn't turn. For a long time, I just sat there, staring straight ahead, my reflection ghosted in the windshield. The whisper came again, softer this time, more like breath moving through the speakers than words. "Turn around." Something in the tone made my chest tighten. It wasn't a command. It was a warning. When I finally did turn, the back window was pale with fog. I thought I saw a shape, a shadow against the glass. Broad shoulders, still. Then it moved, not away but closer, pressing against the condensation until the outline blurred into nothing. The radio died. Silence again. I don't know how long I stayed like that, staring at the empty glass. Eventually the light shifted, the kind of late afternoon dimness that sneaks up on you in the mountains. I realized I hadn't eaten, hadn't had water since morning. When I finally stepped out again, the air was colder. The forest was still wrapped in fog, though higher now, ghosting the ridge tops. The gravel under my boots crunched differently, wetter, heavier. Then I saw movement down the lane. A figure. Just a person walking slow, heading the same direction I'd come from, wearing what looked like a faded ranger jacket. I called out. They didn't stop, didn't even turn. When I caught up, or thought I did, there was no one there. Only the trees. And yet, the footprints were right there in the mud, fresh, leading forward. I followed them until they ended at a small wooden post, half-rotted, leaning out of the ground. Faded letters were carved into it. Ash Grove, the campground name from the map. Except, when I looked at the map again, it was gone. That whole section was blank now, the red triangle erased completely. The paper smelled faintly metallic, like blood dried on iron. And when I turned it over, another word had appeared on the back in that same pencil handwriting. Light, almost rubbed away. Keep driving. For a while, I just stood there, staring at that word. Keep driving. It didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt like a command. The fog around me had gone nearly white, erasing the tree line until the world was only about 10 feet deep. Every sound seemed amplified, the scrape of my boots, my own breathing, even the faint tick of cooling metal from the RV engine behind me. I climbed back inside and slammed the door. The interior light flickered once before settling into a weak yellow glow. I spread the map across the counter, tracing the blank spot with my finger. It was gone. The entire section that had shown this ridge, erased down to smooth paper. No ash grove, no contour lines, just emptiness. I should have started the engine right then and driven until I saw another person. But I didn't. I couldn't explain it, but something in me needed to understand what had happened. To make it make sense before I left. That's when I noticed the smell again. Faint, just beneath the scent of damp wood and fuel. Metallic, like the air before a lightning strike. I turned toward the back window. The fog pressed against it, pale and thick, like something alive was leaning close from the other side. I switched on the radio, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to know whether it would happen again. For a minute, there was nothing but static. Then, faintly, the same voice pattern emerged. Silver Pines, frequency, lost. The rhythm was the same, but the tone had changed. It sounded slower, almost strained, as if the signal were being stretched thin. I adjusted the dial, searching for something clearer. For a fraction of a second, the static cut out, and I heard something else. The creak of wood, the sound of boots on gravel, a distant door closing. Then the voice again, quieter now. Don't stop. The radio went dead. That's when I realized my reflection in the window wasn't moving with me. It sounds impossible, but it's true. My reflection just stood there, frozen, hands still on the radio dial, while I slowly backed away. Then, a moment later, it caught up, snapping back into sync as if it had lagged behind. I couldn't breathe. Something about that moment broke the logic in my head. The last bit of belief that this was just an illusion or fatigue. Because if my reflection could hesitate, what else could slip out of time with me? I packed everything in 15 minutes. Didn't bother cleaning up. I threw the map onto the passenger seat and turned the key. The engine caught, rough but steady. I backed out, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the fog. The lane was still muddy, and the tires slid more than once as I pressed forward, but I didn't care. I just needed to move. About half a mile down, I passed something I hadn't seen before, a wooden sign, barely standing, half-eaten by rot. Letters carved shallowly into the board read, Silver Pines Camp. I hit the brakes so hard the RV skidded sideways, that name again. But here's what didn't make sense. There wasn't supposed to be anything called Silver Pines here. Not on the map, not in any search result. And yet, there it was, right in front of me, a signpost pointing down a narrow dirt road swallowed by fog. I should have kept going. Every rational part of me knew that. But something deeper, curiosity, fear, whatever part of the human brain confuses danger for closure, pulled me toward it. I turned down the path. The trees leaned closer the deeper I went, their branches so dense they looked almost fused together. The sound of gravel under my tires dulled, replaced by something softer, like the road had turned to moss. The radio came alive again without warning. A low hum at first, then a voice, clearer than before, almost conversational. You're on the wrong side. I froze. The voice was my own, not an echo, not a recording, my exact tone, my cadence coming through the speakers. Then silence. I reached for the power knob, but before I could touch it, another voice came through. Different this time. Male, older, steady in a way that made my stomach twist. They never listen, it said. The signal snapped off. That's when I saw the lights ahead, faint glows between the trees. At first, I thought they were lanterns, but as I got closer, I realized they were electric. Small floodlights, the kind you'd find at a campground. I slowed the RV, headlights washing over what looked like a row of decaying picnic shelters. The paint peeled in strips from their posts, and the ground was overgrown, but there was a pattern to it, like the remnants of organized campsites long abandoned. There were RVs, too. 3 of them, parked in uneven rows, each half consumed by vines and rust. Windows fogged from the inside. One of them was the same model as mine. Same color, same year. I killed the engine and just sat there, hands on the wheel. The fog swirled between the vehicles, and through the haze I thought I saw movement. A shadow shifting inside one of the old RVs. The metallic scent was so strong now it stung my throat. I opened the door and stepped out, every instinct screaming to get back inside, to leave, but I couldn't. I walked toward the nearest RV, the one that looked like mine. Its license plate was covered in moss. I wiped it clean. Same number, same scratches on the paint, same dent near the taillight. It was mine. Except mine was behind me, running. I turned, but the fog was too thick to see it now. The air around me hummed faintly. Not sound, exactly, but vibration, like the atmosphere itself was charged. Then the radio inside my RV came on again. Static. Then my voice, whispering. Don't stop. I started backing away, eyes fixed on the glowing windows of the copy in front of me. Something moved inside, slow and deliberate, passing across the fogged glass. Then the door opened with a soft creak. I could see into the dark interior, but not what was inside. Just the faint light from my own headlights behind me filtering through the mist. Then I heard it, faint, from inside the woods. The sound of something tapping. The same slow, rhythmic tapping I'd heard that first night. Except now, it was coming from every direction. The sound of fingers or maybe raindrops against metal, against glass, against the earth itself. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root, catching myself on the wet ground. The air buzzed like static all around me, and through it all, that same voice, broken, layered, repeating like a warning buried under miles of distance, Silver Pines, frequency lost, remain calm. Then, another voice, barely audible under it, close enough to feel against my ear. You've been here before. The fog moved like breath around me. Every sound was sharper now, each drip, each distant crack of branches under weight. I stayed low, hands pressed into the mud, staring at that other RV. Its headlights flickered once, though I hadn't seen anyone go inside. Then they shut off completely. Silence followed, and in that silence I heard something I still can't explain. The faint, steady hum of an engine idling, not from my own RV, but from deeper in the fog, where the air shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from invisible ground. I got to my feet, legs shaking, and back toward where I thought I'd parked mine. The fog was so dense now it felt solid. I could barely see more than a few steps ahead, and every direction looked the same, gray and pale and endless. When I finally found my own RV again, the driver's door was open. I know I'd closed it, locked it even. Inside, the radio was still hissing, though the ignition was off. I climbed in, slammed the door, and twisted the dial, desperate to shut it up. But as soon as I touched it, the static cleared and the voice returned. Not my own this time, not the broken warning from before, but something lower, slower. We told you not to follow the map. It wasn't quite human. It had the shape of speech, but not the rhythm, like someone remembering how to talk after forgetting for a long, long time. I turned off the radio completely and yanked the power cord out of the socket. The static stopped, but the air didn't go silent. The sound kept going, faint but everywhere, outside, under the floor, maybe even inside my head. I don't know what made me look down then, but I did, and noticed the map had slid off the passenger seat onto the floor. It was open to a blank page. Except, it wasn't blank anymore. Thin black lines now cut across the paper, uneven, hand-drawn trails that branched like veins. At the center, in dark pencil, was a circle labeled in the same frantic handwriting as before. Silver Pines. You're inside it. My stomach turned. I folded the map shut and threw it into the sink. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life, and I slammed it into drive. I don't remember making decisions after that. I just drove. The lane seemed to rearrange itself as I went. Curves that weren't there before, inclines that rose and fell like waves. The fog pulsed with the light of my beams, thick enough to swallow color, turning everything white. And then, for the first time in hours, I saw something new. A sign. Not old and weathered this time, but clean. Reflective. Bold black letters on white metal. Exit 4. Silver Pines. I slowed down, staring. It looked new. Official, like it belonged on a highway. But I wasn't on a highway. I followed it anyway, turning down a narrow road that descended between steep ridges. My headlights cut through layers of mist, revealing flashes of pavement, then gravel, then dirt again. I drove until the road ended at a clearing. There were no trees here, just open, uneven ground, the soil black and damp. The air buzzed faintly, like electricity humming through wires that didn't exist. At the center of the clearing stood a metal tower, not tall, maybe 40 feet, but old, its framework rusted, its antenna bent like a snapped bone. At the base sat a boxy control cabinet, its door half open. A faint red light blinked inside. It looked like a radio tower. The moment I stepped out, the static vanished. The air went dead quiet, a silence so deep it almost rang in my ears. I approached the tower slowly, mud pulling at my boots. The closer I got, the colder the air became. When I reached the control box, I saw that the blinking light came from an old transceiver, its faceplate cracked, its knobs labeled with fading letters. A faint hum came from its speaker. Then, softly, a voice. Silver Pine's transmission active, coordinate drift detected. I froze. There was a folder wedged beside the transceiver, old, water-warped, stamped with a faded logo that looked government-issued. I pulled it out carefully, flipping it open. Inside were half-destroyed pages, most unreadable. But one fragment, typed in black ink, was still legible. Frequencies observed along ridgelines of western North Carolina. Distortion localized near coordinates formerly mapped as Ash Grove. Cartographic anomalies noted. Personnel advised not to engage with unidentified signals or to trust geographic memory. At the bottom, a signature line. No name, just a symbol, a small pine tree drawn inside a circle. My hands went cold because I'd seen that same symbol before, carved faintly into the picnic table at my first campsite, the one I thought was random. I dropped the file. It landed in the mud with a soft slap. The transceiver crackled again, louder now, and a new voice cut through, this time unmistakably mine. You should have kept driving. The red light flared brighter, pulsing faster. The metal of the tower began to vibrate, a low hum rising until it became almost unbearable. The air shimmered, distorting the fog into ripples. And then for just a second, everything around me blinked, like the world cut to static and back again. When it cleared, the fog was gone. The clearing was dry. The tower was gone. I was standing beside my RV on a paved overlook, the sky pale with morning light. My phone buzzed for the first time in days, a flood of missed calls and messages from people asking where I'd gone. According to the GPS, I was 15 miles north of Asheville. No Silver Pines, no Ash Grove, no sign of any back road matching what I'd driven. I climbed into the RV, dazed, half laughing with disbelief. The map was still on the floor, blank again. For a long moment, I just sat there, engine idling, staring at the morning sun pushing through the trees. Everything looked normal, beautiful even. Then faintly, from the radio, static. And underneath it, layered low, almost inaudible, frequency restored. The smell returned then, faint metallic like wet rust. And outside, across the asphalt overlook, there was another RV parked, same model, same color, facing the same direction. Its door was open, and from inside, I swear I heard my own voice say, very softly, "You've been here before." I don't remember driving away, just the feeling of the road beneath me, the soft hum of tires over asphalt, the sunlight cutting through my windshield like it had been waiting for me to notice it again. For a long time, I didn't think at all. I just let the Volkswagen roll forward, mile after mile, through that quiet mountain morning. Birds darted between branches. The fog burned off in ribbons. Everything looked perfect, too perfect. At one point, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, the reflection didn't match the road behind me. It showed the dirt clearing, the one with the tower. Then it blinked away, leaving nothing but a normal highway winding through green. I told myself it was exhaustion, sleep deprivation, the brain finding patterns where there aren't any. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. Not a thing, not a person, but a frequency, a hum, a vibration just beyond hearing. I kept driving west. I don't know why, maybe just to put distance between me and whatever that place was. Maybe because part of me wanted to see if the road would start folding again, if the fog would come back. It never did. By the time I reached Tonopah 2 weeks later, the Volkswagen felt like home again. But it didn't sound the same. When I shut off the engine at night, there was still a faint ticking in the dash, like static trapped in the wires. If I turned the radio dial just right, I could catch the whisper of a signal that didn't belong to any station. It didn't say words anymore, just a low, slow pulse. I started sleeping with the windows open to hear the desert wind instead. It was cleaner that way. Sometimes out there in the high desert, I'd see other vans passing on the highway. Some were newer, cleaner, families, couples, weekend travelers, but every once in a while, one looked exactly like mine. Same color, same dent near the back fender. And sometimes when the sun hit the windshield just right, I could swear I saw my own silhouette behind their wheel. Maybe that's what Silver Pines really was. Not a place you find on a map, but something that finds you. A frequency that slips through all the noise and lines itself up with your life, waiting for the moment you get quiet enough to hear it. I've come to believe we all tune into something out here on the road. Some people catch music, others catch silence, and some of us catch the echo of something that shouldn't be speaking, but does anyway. I don't think I escaped Silver Pines. I think I carried it with me, because every night when I stopped to rest, I still set up camp like before. Slide open the side door, set out the folding chair, watch the sunset dip behind the ridgeline, and when the light fades, I tell myself not to touch the radio. But sometimes when the stars are bright and the desert is too quiet, I do it anyway. I twist the dial, and there it is, faint, patient, waiting. Static first, then that hum, low and endless. And if I listen long enough, under all that noise, I can almost hear my voice whispering back. Calm, steady, still here. I don't think anyone truly chooses to return to the place that broke them, but sometimes the road curves back whether you're ready or not. My name is Elias Moreno, I'm 37 years old, and I told myself I'd finally make peace with California. I had spent years avoiding the state, its cracked desert highways, its rugged backcountry, its ghost town campgrounds that look like leftovers from someone else's nightmare. Too many memories buried in the dry soil. Too many nights I still wake up sweating, convinced that what happened wasn't over, that it was only waiting. But sometimes fear disguises itself as unfinished business. And that's how I convinced myself to get behind the wheel of my old RV and head south, just me, the open highway, and the lie that I was stronger now. The sun was low when I turned off the paved road, nothing around me but brittle brush, scorched earth, and sky that stretched so wide it made you feel like the world was trying to swallow you whole. The GPS kept glitching, recalculating, even though there was only one dirt track winding deeper into nowhere. When the last bar disappeared from my phone, I told myself that was the point. Disconnect, reset, heal. But I'd forgotten something important. Silence isn't peaceful when your mind is already loud. The campground wasn't on any map, just a cluster of sun-bleached picnic tables behind a faded sign that read, "No longer maintained. Camp at your own risk." The lettering was cracked, bullet-pocked. Wind hissed through the sign like it was trying to say something through its teeth. I parked beneath a dying oak, branches long and skeletal, reaching out like they wanted something from me. Dust swirled in little devils around my boots. The air smelled like heated metal, like something charged. I stepped out, stretched, told myself the shaking in my hands was just leftover tension from the drive. Nothing to worry about. No one here. No memories here. Except that wasn't true. The mountains to the east, I recognized them. Jagged silhouettes I thought I'd never see again. I shook the thought loose, forced a breath, forced a smile that no one could see. I walked a slow loop around the campground, 6 spots total. Empty fire rings, ash long cooled, a few broken beer bottles glittering in the sand. Wooden posts marking what used to be campsites stood like the teeth of a giant animal left to rot in the desert. No footsteps, no tire tracks, no sign of life, just the kind of stillness that doesn't feel natural, the kind that feels staged. I should have left right then. But healing, I told myself, requires discomfort. I set up a small chair outside the RV, cracked open a warm bottle of water, and watched the sky bruise into oranges and purples. Coyotes yipped somewhere far off, normal desert music. The temperature dropped fast, as if the heat hadn't been real at all, just a mirage pretending this land could ever be comfortable. The first real shiver crawled under my skin, and then footsteps, not heavy, not hurried, just footsteps, crunching lightly across gravel, stopping behind the far picnic table. I turned sharply, nobody. The dirt was flat and bare. If someone had been standing there, I would have seen them. I told myself it must have been a rabbit, but the steps had been too slow, too deliberate. Something else occurred to me. They matched mine. I swallowed. The air felt thinner. I could hear my heart in my ears, pounding like something trying to get out. All right, Elias, you're tired, you're stressed, you're imagining things. But the desert doesn't let go of what we try to bury. Night came like a curtain drop, sudden, star-splattered, unforgivingly dark. I turned on my lantern, its glow pooling around the chair. The rest of the world disappeared just beyond that circle of light. I could hear the quiet shifting of the land, wind against sand, distant rocks settling, and then breathing. Soft and wet and too close. It felt like someone was leaning in behind me, exhaling slowly down the back of my neck. Every hair rose. My chest tightened. I didn't turn. Couldn't. For a full minute, I was a statue made of fear, barely daring to blink. But when I did spin around, nothing. Just dark. Just emptiness wide as the state itself. My lantern flickered. The oak branches scraped above me, cracking like knuckles being popped one by one. And beneath that sound, something else scraped. Something like a fingernail dragging slowly across bark. A sound that doesn't belong to wind or animals. A human sound. I backed toward the RV, trying to keep my breathing even. Get inside, lock the doors, sleep with the lights on. Just one night. One night to say I tried. I yanked the door open and climbed in fast, shutting the world out with a slam. The air inside felt stale, safer, but not safe. My trembling fingers clicked the deadbolt into place. I stood there listening, counting seconds by my heartbeat. That's when my dashboard lit up. Bright. Sudden. Blinding. All the indicator lights flickered on at once. Check engine, oil pressure, ABS. Like the RV was having a panic attack of its own. The radio crackled to life, even though I hadn't touched it in hours. Static. Then, just beneath the static, a voice. I couldn't make out words, but the tone... It sounded like someone trying not to cry. I reached for the radio, but before my hand touched the knob, the voice got louder, sharper, like it sensed me. The RV vibrated with it, like the metal itself was reacting. Then, Elias, my name, whispered so close it seemed to come from inside the speakers or from behind them. No, I did not come here for this. Not again. Not after all these years convincing myself the past stayed back here in the dust. I slammed the radio off. My reflection stared back at me in the dark window, eyes too wide, chest rising too fast. I tried to calm down, to tell myself names can be coincidences, that voices can be tricks of an exhausted mind. But the radio stayed dark, and the voice now came from outside. Elias, soft, drawn out, like a childhood friend calling me from the yard, like a memory wearing someone else's voice. My past trauma wasn't supposed to find me here, but fear doesn't follow rules, and California never forgets what it claims. I grabbed the curtains and pulled them shut, sealing out the night. I crawled into the RV's bed and pulled the blankets up even though the heat was still clinging to my skin. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the desert kept whispering my name. By midnight, I wasn't sure if I wanted morning to come or if I was afraid of what morning might reveal. I must have drifted into a light sleep because the sound that snapped me awake felt like a violation. Bootsteps. Heavy ones. Crunching slow and deliberate across the gravel outside the RV. Not the coyotes, not the wind, not the shifting brush. A person. My heart punched hard against my ribs. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, frozen, listening. Crunch, pause. Crunch. Whoever it was didn't try to be quiet. They wanted me to hear them. That somehow felt worse than stealth. Confidence. Ownership. I reached out and killed the lantern next to my bed. The darkness folded in immediately, thick, suffocating. Only a sliver of moonlight pushed through the tiny crack in the curtains, casting a thin blade of pale light across the RV floor. Crunch. Closer this time. I slid silently off the bed. My bare feet met the cold floor, sending a shiver through me. The breathing outside stopped, but I could feel a presence lingering right on the other side of the wall. Listening back, I crouched low, inching toward the front of the RV. My fingers shook as I reached up to gently nudge the curtain near the passenger window, just enough to look without revealing movement. I wished I hadn't. A man stood about 10 feet away, half in shadow, facing the RV. Clothes too dark to make out any details, hat pulled low, barely moving. Just watching. arms loose at his sides. A stillness that didn't look human. I ducked back down, pulse throbbing like a hammer in my skull. Calm down, Elias. Just a hiker. Just someone wandering. But nobody wanders in pitch-black desert without a light. Nobody walks straight to the only occupied campsite without a reason. Nobody stands staring like the night already belongs to them. I tried to steady my breath, but it wouldn't obey. I needed something to defend myself. My hands scrambled quietly through a cabinet until I found the small hatchet I kept for chopping firewood. I gripped it so tightly I felt the handle imprinting my palm. Crunch. Another step. Right up to the RV door, he tapped once. Knuckles on metal, soft, too soft. Tap, tap, tap. Like a rhythm. A message. I didn't answer. My throat refused to open. Then he spoke, not like the voice from the radio. This one was grounded, male, low, dry, like sand had replaced his vocal cords. I know you're in there. No anger, no impatience, just a statement of fact, a boundary crossed without hesitation. I kept perfectly still, clutching the hatchet, willing myself invisible. The man leaned in. I could hear the faint shift of fabric as he pressed closer to the door. RV's too nice to be out here alone, isn't it? Every muscle in my jaw clenched. The heat earlier in the day had faded completely, leaving a bone-deep chill. His footsteps scraped against the metal step. He was climbing. I can help you settle in. No. I backed away from the door, slow steps, hatchet poised. My breath was too loud. I hated that he could probably hear it. The doorknob rattled. Hard. Then again, violent this time. He was checking the lock. That's when instinct overpowered fear. Run. But where? Into the desert night with a stranger? Or stay trapped in a metal box? The windows. If he got in, windows would be the only exit. I scanned for the emergency latch above the bed. If he broke through the door, I'd climb out and sprint for the dark, praying he didn't have a weapon. His voice came again, trembling on the edge of amusement. You think you're safe in there, Elias? My name. My goddamn name. Ice slid into my veins. He wasn't lost. He wasn't curious. He came for me. The RV rocked slightly, weight shifting onto the step outside. I gripped the hatchet tighter. If he breached the door, a sharp clanged. Metal cried under pressure. I stumbled back, heart lodged somewhere in my throat. There was no time to plan, no time to think. He hissed the next words, almost laughing. California remembers you. The bottom dropped out of my stomach, panic mixed with disbelief. How? Who was he talking about? What the hell did he know? The desert wind gusted suddenly, slamming against the side of the RV. Something howled through the oak branches. The stranger went silent. Then, footsteps. Fast, retreating. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Fading into the dark, I waited. Counted 60 seconds. Then 60 more. Pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing but wind. I dared another peek through the curtain. Gone. Every instinct screamed trap. But staying here was worse. I grabbed keys, flashlight, water bottle, hatchet in hand. I clicked the unlock button before my brain could stop me, cracked the door open, and stepped out. The night swallowed me whole. Silence. So heavy it felt like a hand pushing on the back of my neck. I shone the flashlight beam across the campsite, empty. No footprints in the beam's reach, no figure lurking in the brush. I pivoted toward the picnic table area. Footprints, a clear set trailing away from the RV, deep, wide stride, leading northeast, then disappearing into a patch of disturbance. Scuffed dirt, like a struggle, like multiple feet twisting. Then nothing. The tracks just ended. As if the ground closed. A coyote yelped in the distance, followed by a choking noise cut short. The flashlight flickered. I looked back at the RV, my only real shelter. But every cell in my body recoiled at the idea of going back inside. I scanned the darkness again, breath shallow. The land shifted, not physically, but in feeling, like it had tilted in favor of something else, something awakened by that stranger's voice, something more dangerous than him. California remembers you. A branch snapped somewhere beyond the circle of light, too loud, too heavy. I turned the flashlight. Nothing. Another snap. Closer. I backed toward the RV step, my shoes scraping grit. The thirst for fight or flight tore through me. But the desert doesn't care what you choose. The next sound wasn't footsteps. It was laughter. But not the man's. not quite human, not quite alone. I stumbled back inside the RV and slammed the door behind me, double locking, chest heaving. My flashlight beam jittered across the walls. The radio hissed again, soft this time, like it was listening. I crouched down trying to breathe, trying not to completely lose it. This wasn't random. This wasn't paranoia. Someone knew me. Something knew me. And here, survival meant remembering what California took from me last time and why I swore I'd never come back. I stayed crouched on the RV floor for a long time, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, listening to the desert breathe around me. Every sound felt like a warning. Every passing second felt stolen. I checked the lock again. Solid. I tried the radio one more time. The static had gone silent, leaving nothing but the hollow, dark quiet inside the RV. I turned the dial slowly, hoping for a distraction, music, talking, even weather reports. Instead, I found a very soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails, on the antenna. I shut the radio off immediately. My skin prickled as though invisible hands were still drumming against the metal. Focus. I needed a plan. Get out at first light. Drive in any direction until I found pavement again. No reason to stay here. No reason to test fate twice. I crept to a small slit in the curtain and peeled it back just enough to see a sliver of the night. The landscape looked wrong, like something had shifted while I wasn't watching. The oak tree branches seemed longer, reaching closer to the RV, the way shadows move when a fire flickers. But there was no fire. The picnic tables looked further apart. The sign at the entrance tilted, like the earth itself had exhaled and changed shape. My eyes tried to make sense of it. But what really stole the breath from my lungs were the footprints. Dozens now. Deep, heavy. Encircling the RV in a wide ring, as if multiple people had been standing there silently, watching. As if I had slept through all of it. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I dropped the curtain and backed away, holding the hatchet so tight my knuckles ached. That was when the knocking started. Not at the door, on the window right beside me. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. My eyes tracked to the glass. The curtain was still mostly closed, but I could see the slightest indentation where something pressed against the screen, like a forehead leaning close. I swallowed hard, throat bone dry. Get away from the window, Elias. But I couldn't move. The familiarity of the scene was paralyzing. A memory clawed up from the depths. Another window, another night, another knock that shouldn't have been there. Another camping trip in California. Another ending I tried desperately to forget. Tap, tap, tap. The third knock came softer. Almost. Cautious. Like the thing outside wasn't sure I'd respond. I forced myself to breathe. Then I did what I swore I'd never do again. I looked. My trembling fingers pinched the curtain's edge and lifted it half an inch, just enough to see a face right there, pressed against the glass, eyes that reflected just the barest glint of moonlight, wide, hollow. The skin stretched too tight across cheekbones, lips cracked open, trembling with each breath. The man from before, but wrong. Wrong in the way a photograph might seem if the memory behind it had died. His head twitched as though strings pulled him from above. His neck bent at an angle that made my stomach clench. He smiled, teeth too evenly spaced, too perfect. A smile practiced for years in a mirror but never tested in real emotion. Elias, he didn't speak the name, he mouthed it, and his lips didn't match the sound that came next, a voice right behind me. You left me here. My heart stopped. I spun, hatchet raised, and nearly dropped it. The inside of the RV was empty. But the voice, I knew it. Every syllable was a ghost dragging its fingers across my spine. I backed away until the back of my legs hit the small dining seat. My pulse tried to outrun itself. I hadn't heard that voice in 10 years. Not since the last night I camped in this damned state. Not since I'd left someone behind. No, it couldn't be them. They were gone. I had seen a pounding slam against the windshield cut through the panic. Then another. The RV rocked violently. The man outside was beating on it now, hands hitting the glass flat and hard. His expression didn't change, still that eerie, practiced smile. His eyes never blinked. I scrambled into the driver's seat, slamming the keys into the ignition, twisting hard. Nothing. The dashboard didn't light up. The engine didn't click. It was dead, like something had drained the life out of it. I slammed my palms against the steering wheel, a fractured growl ripping from my chest. Fear and frustration boiled together, shaking my entire body. Another slam. Harder. The windshield spiderwebbed. My breath caught. He was going to break through. I dropped the hatchet on the passenger seat and lunged toward the driver's window, grabbing the emergency crank to roll it up tighter, even though it was already shut. A whisper brushed my ear. Don't run again. I lurched back so fast I hit my head against the cabinet. Stars burst across my vision. I clutched the wall, desperate to find the source. Tears blurred my sight, but the world stayed cruelly clear. The man outside stopped hitting the glass. He tilted his head slowly, unnaturally, like a crow studying roadkill. Something moved behind him. Dark, tall, leaner than a man should be. Limbs wrong, joints reversed. Its shadow stretched across the desert sand like spilled ink. A shrill ring burst from the radio. Sudden, violent. The light on the dial flashed. I didn't turn it on. The stitching holding my thinking together ripped. I lunged for the radio, hoping, praying, that any voice on the other end would be real. Static. Then a gasp. Elias, a different voice, a familiar one. I squeezed the receiver tighter. Say it again, I whispered, terrified of the answer. The voice trembled, full of pain. You were supposed to come back. The memories slammed into me like a truck. The night I'd abandoned someone when the world had turned against us. The desert swallowing them whole. The guilt I had paved over with lies. Something slammed onto the roof, heavy, shifting weight. The man outside lifted one hand and pointed directly at me. The thing behind him crouched, like a predator preparing to pounce. For a split second, reality shattered. My guilt took human shape while something else, something impossibly old, stood behind it. Two threats, one rooted in the past, one born of this land. I thought I had come back here to heal. But California doesn't heal you. California makes you finish what you ran from. The roof bent inward, metal groaning. Another slam. Closer. If I didn't move now, I'd never move again. I grabbed the hatchet, yanked the emergency window latch, and forced myself to do the one thing I'd been running from for a decade. Confront the night. I threw the window open and pulled myself into the darkness outside just as the roof collapsed behind me. The desert exhaled, and I started to run. The cold night air knifed into my lungs as I hit the ground outside the RV and ran. Sand and loose rock slipped beneath my shoes, threatening to throw me down with every frantic step. Behind me, metal shrieked as something tore into the RV's shell. The sound of breaking steel echoed across the desert, too violent to be human. I didn't dare look back. The mountains loomed ahead, jagged silhouettes under a thin moon. I aimed for them, praying that elevation would give me some advantage. High ground, rocks to shield me, anything more than open land and a dead engine behind me. The desert night swallowed every bit of breath I had. My flashlight beam bounced wildly ahead, catching glimpses of scrub and ragged stone. My heart hammered panic into my throat. Every instinct screamed to stop and hide, but stopping meant death. I made it halfway to the first ridge when I heard it. A deliberate, powerful thud on hard earth. Then another. It was following. Not running, not rushing, just walking. Each step somehow heavier than the last, like it was gaining mass, like the earth recoiled from its weight. I veered toward a narrow cut between two slabs of rock, an animal trail at best. The flashlight revealed a shallow ravine, walls steep enough to protect me from sight. I slid down fast, scraping hands and knees, dirt grinding into my skin. Silence. Too much silence. I dropped low behind a boulder, chest heaving. My fingers ached from clutching the hatchet. Sweat stung my eyes despite the cold. Don't breathe loud. Don't think loud. Don't. A stone clattered above. My pulse stalled. Then came the sound of shifting gravel as something stepped to the ravine's edge. The moonlight cast a long, warped shadow down the rock. Too tall, limbs too thin, like a marionette untethered from gravity but still forced to obey its bones. It didn't move for several seconds. It just knew I was below, knew I was listening, knew I was afraid. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Slowly it began descending, not climbing down but leveraging gravity, limbs bending wrong, joints reversing with sickening smoothness. No sound, no hesitation. Its silence screamed possession of the night. I scrambled deeper into the ravine, boots slipping, body slamming into rock. Pain flared across my ribs, but adrenaline shoved it aside. The narrow ravine abruptly widened into a sloping field of sharp boulders. If I fell wrong here, I'd break something. If I hesitated, I'd die. I picked a direction and pushed forward. The ground dipped unexpectedly, and I slid, hands clawing at cold stone. At the bottom, a dry creek bed twisted toward a steep incline leading up into the mountains proper. Behind me, gravel trickled, light, like fingertips brushing stone. I made the mistake of looking back. The thing stood only yards away, halfway through the ravine. Its head inclined, body motionless, like it waited for permission to pounce. Moonlight struck its face, too long, hollow where eyes should be. A mask of absence. My heart failed to beat for a second, maybe two. Then I ran harder than I thought possible. My legs burned, my lungs begged, but fear kept me upright. Every footfall was a bargain. Don't fall, don't freeze. The incline got steeper, the air thinner, the rock sharper beneath the soles of my shoes. Halfway up the slope, a rusted metal sign appeared from the dark, bent, half-buried. Warning, mine shafts beyond this point enter at your own risk. I didn't think. I didn't debate. Risk meant shelter. Shelter meant time. I sprinted toward the nearest opening, an abandoned mine scarred into the mountainside. The timber beams at the entrance sagged like ribs from a long-dead beast. I crashed through them, splinters catching my sleeves, and plunged into blackness. The air inside was colder, stale with mineral stink. My flashlight caught wooden supports eaten by age, rails buried under decades of dust. My footsteps rang too loud. I ducked behind the first support column, chest pressed tight against it. My breath quivered. The silence thickened until it became a sound of its own. Then, a scrape. At the mouth of the mine. Metal on stone. It had found me. The flashlight flickered again. Weak battery. Perfect. I backed farther into the tunnel, moving blind half the time. Wooden beams stretched deeper, like vertebrae disappearing down a spine of darkness. Every few steps I had to reach out, fingers trailing the cold wood to know I wasn't about to slam into rock. I stumbled once, knees hitting the ground, hatchet skittering away. My panic doubled until I grabbed it again. I couldn't lose the one thing that felt like a weapon. Far behind me, the rhythmic shifting of earth grew louder. It entered the mine. The beams creaked, reacting to its presence. I turned the flashlight behind me. Empty. Not because it wasn't there, because the beam wasn't strong enough to catch it. The mine trembled softly, dust drifting from the ceiling like ancient breath exhaled after years of holding still. The beast behind me made no sound except the subtle compression of ground beneath unnatural weight. My thoughts spiraled, past trauma, guilt, the voice on the radio, the stranger's smile, all of it converging. The memory I'd buried began clawing out. That night, 10 years ago, someone else running beside me, a scream swallowed by the earth, my own legs refusing to turn back, I abandoned them. I left California and told myself they died quickly. But what if they didn't? What if something else found them first? My vision blurred. Tears. Dust. Fear. I forced myself farther into the mine until a curve swallowed the entrance from view. For a moment, just a moment, I felt hidden. Then I noticed the air shift. Colder. Thicker. Like I'd stepped into a room where someone had died and the grief never dissipated. I raised the flashlight slowly and froze. Rail tracks. Fresh drag marks carved into the dust. Not old. Not natural. As if something had been hauled deeper into the mountain. Something big. Or many somethings. My stomach turned inside out. The silence behind me broke. A soft crack of wood under immense force. I spun around. Something moved just outside my beam's reach. Silent but unmistakable. A shape unfolding itself to full height. Limbs stretching like shadows refusing to behave. I didn't know what it was, but I knew who it wanted. Me. I bolted deeper into the mine, losing all sense of direction. The tunnel forked and twisted, walls narrowing, ceiling dropping. At one point, I felt rock scrape my back as I squeezed through a tight section. My flashlight flickered again, threatening to leave me in pure black. Then the tunnel split ahead. Left, a steep descent into pitch blackness. Right, a narrow crawl space that might lead nowhere. The thing behind me crept closer, its silence louder than screams. I didn't have time to think. I chose right. I didn't think. I just threw myself into the crawl space. The opening squeezed tight around my shoulders, rock scraping my ribs as I forced my body inside. There wasn't enough room to turn around. The stone pressed cold against my back and chest. My flashlight beam jittered ahead, illuminating a throat of darkness tightening around me. Behind me, the mine breathed. A low groan of wood and shifting earth vibrated the tunnel, like the mountain itself disapproved of my choice. I dragged myself forward on my elbows, feet scrambling uselessly behind. The crawl space narrowed further, the rock biting deeper into flesh. Panic clawed up my throat. If I got stuck here, if I couldn't move, if that thing... A scrape echoed at the entrance behind me. Then a pause. Then another scrape. Not movement. A test. It was checking how deep I'd gone. How far until I couldn't go back. I tried to breathe through my nose, but the air was thick with minerals and dust. I coughed, loud enough to expose my exact position. The scrape stopped. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The fear behind me had weight. A gravitational pull that wanted me to make the fatal mistake of turning toward it. I pressed on, pain igniting across my chest every time the rock pinched. My flashlight flickered, and in that moment of darkness, the space felt like a coffin, only I wasn't dead yet. The beam returned weakly, cutting a narrow path in front of me. The walls came closer, like the mountain was crushing inward. My breath grew short and fast. Sweat soaked the dust on my skin, turning it to mud. Then a whisper of cold air brushed my face from ahead. Open space. Hope. I shimmied faster, ignoring the ripping sensation on my forearm as skin scraped raw. The crawl space suddenly widened just enough for me to pull my knees in. I pushed forward and spilled into a small chamber that smelled of rot and something older, like the earth itself had soured. I scrambled onto my feet, holding the flashlight high. What I saw made the world tilt. The chamber was tall, with a ragged ceiling where stone had been torn away, not mined, ripped. The floor was littered with old mining gear covered in rust and clothing, shredded fabric, shoes twisted in impossible shapes, a single backpack half buried in dust, and bones. Long bones, short bones of them, like something had dragged bodies here over and over. The skulls were wrong, crushed as though squeezed from the sides. My stomach convulsed. The mine wasn't abandoned. It was claimed. And I wasn't the first to run here. A soft thump behind me snapped my head toward the crawl space. The dark silhouette filled the opening. It didn't struggle to fit. It poured through, spine bowing, limbs bending until it snapped upright, towering to full height without a sound. The sight of it broke something in me. My mind tried to reject what my eyes insisted existed, long arms that hung too low, a torso stretched as though gravity had been rearranged. It didn't breathe. It just expanded into the space like shadow becoming solid. I stumbled backwards, smashing into a stack of old crates. The hatchet nearly fell from my grip. The creature stepped forward, a single soundless motion, and I realized something horrifying. It didn't hesitate. It never hesitated, because it had hunted here before. I raised the hatchet, though it felt like a child's toy. The creature tilted its head as if curious why I bothered. Then the chamber shook, a sudden roar of stone grinding against stone. Dust rained down. A crack shot across the ceiling. The creature looked up. It understood before I did. The mine was collapsing. I ran. I sprinted toward the far side of the chamber where a narrow cut in the rock led into deeper darkness. The ground lurched as boulders crashed from above. The creature moved, faster than anything that size should. Its claw swiped, catching the back of my jacket. The fabric tore. The force sent me stumbling to my knees, palms skidding on sharp rock. Blood slicked the stones beneath me, but fear unlocked a reserve of strength. One last violent shove forward. I wriggled through the cut just as a support beam snapped behind me. Half the chamber caved in, a thunderous roar, stones screaming, dust choking the world. The creature's arm thrust through the narrowing gap, claw fingers clawing inches from my leg, then the rock slammed shut. Silence swallowed everything. I lay face down, coughing, shaking uncontrollably. My flashlight clattered away, its beam faint and trembling. Grit ground between my teeth. The darkness felt heavier now, pressing tight, forcing me to feel every heartbeat. Alive. I was alive. But the mine was now a tomb, and the beast was still somewhere inside with me. Maybe behind another wall, maybe circling through another tunnel, maybe waiting for the silence to break. I pushed myself upright, grabbing the dimming flashlight, and continued forward. No choice left but to go deeper and hope the mountain eventually spat me out instead of consuming the rest. The tunnel tightened again, but not as narrow as the crawl space. My footsteps echoed, too loudly. The dust on the ground stirred behind me. I wasn't alone. I forced my breathing quieter, listening. Drip, faraway water, crack, old timber shifting, then click, 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 footsteps. Bare, bony, too light to be human weight, too deliberate to be falling debris. It was tracking the sound of my heart beating. I pushed on, the flashlight pulse stuttering like it shared my dread. My mind flickered with fractured memories. A different night, a different scream, my hand letting go of someone who begged me not to run. California doesn't heal. California collects. The passage dropped suddenly. My foot found nothing but air, and I pitched forward into darkness. I tumbled down a rocky slope, crashing to the bottom in a shower of pain. The flashlight flew from my grip and died completely. The world snapped into total black. My breath shattered into pieces. I blindly clawed the ground, searching, but there was only stone and my own panic. Something above slid down the same path I had fallen. Slow. Intentional. I couldn't see it, which made it infinitely worse. The darkness pressed against my skin like a warning, move or die. My hands found a wall, damp and cold. I followed it, feeling for openings, for air currents, for hope. Every step was made by instinct, every thought swallowed by fear. Then, faint, a whisper of light. Not much, just a soft glow painting a jagged crack in the rock ahead. A way out? Or something worse? Behind me, the creature's silent descent ended. Stone crunched under its weight. It was right there. I squeezed through the crack, jagged rock biting into my back. My skin tore, but I pushed. The tunnel widened suddenly and the glow brightened. Moonlight. I stumbled forward and collapsed onto a ledge high in the mountainside. Cold wind slapped my face. The world outside the mine spread breathlessly far below, the desert stretching wide and silver beneath the moon. I turned back toward the crack I'd emerged from. The darkness inside the mine stared back. Not empty, waiting. The creature didn't follow, not yet. As if the mountain itself had boundaries it couldn't cross. I stood on shaking legs, hatchet slick in my grip, and realized something horrific. What chased me wasn't just hunting the living. It was guarding the dead. The wind stung my eyes as I clung to the ledge, heart thrashing against my ribs like it was trying to escape before the rest of me failed. The desert sprawled out beneath the mountain like a dying thing. The RV, the campsite, a distant dark blot in a sea of night. I looked down at my hands to steady myself. That's when I saw it. The silver ring. Not on my finger, in the dirt at my feet, half buried. A small, slender band with an etched crescent moon. My throat locked. My fingers shook as I picked it up. Dust crumbled off the metal, and the engraving caught a glint of moonlight. Maya's ring, my fiancée, the ring I'd given her the night before I asked her to marry me, her laughter warm against my cheek, her voice promising we'd always take care of each other, the same ring she was wearing 10 years ago, the night I left her behind. My vision blurred, tears or moonlight or madness, I couldn't tell. My body swayed dangerously close to the edge. The weight of guilt hit me harder than any fall could. She couldn't be here. She couldn't be alive. This couldn't be real. But the world didn't care what I believed. Footsteps crunched on the ledge behind me, not heavy enough to be the creature. Softer. Human. I turned slowly, afraid of hope. A figure stood a dozen yards away. A woman. Shoulders slumped, hair hanging forward, hiding her face, clothes torn, coated in earth, bare feet, cut and bleeding. I couldn't breathe. Maya, her name escaped me as barely a whisper. My knees nearly buckled beneath me. I stepped forward once, twice, the ring pressed tight against my chest. She didn't move. Maya, I whispered again, louder this time, voice cracking open like the sky before a storm. Her head twitched upward, slowly, like it weighed too much. Her arms hung limp at her sides. The wind caught strands of her hair, revealing the curve of a cheek that I knew better than my own reflection. She took one dragging step toward me. My body lunged on instinct, closing the distance. I needed to see her face, hear her voice, hold her, apologize for the coward I had been. A faint metallic clink froze me mid-stride. Something glinted on her wrist. A cuff. Shackle. With a snapped chain hanging from it. A miner's restraint, or a captive's. My heart imploded. Her other arm lifted, bent wrong at the elbow, bones moving under the skin like they'd healed without permission. She took another step, and her bare foot slid in a way that told me she wasn't fully controlling it. The creature hadn't just hunted here. It had taken. Her face lifted fully now, moonlight exposing what was left of the woman I loved. One eye clouded white, lid torn, jaw stiff and misaligned, lips cracked open as she tried to speak, but what came out wasn't breath, it was silence. A scream swallowed before sound could form. A tear slipped down her cheek. Or maybe it was blood. She reached her hand toward me, fingers trembling, grasping for the ring now shaking between mine. And then she jerked backward violently, yanked by something unseen. Her body dragged across the rock, heels scraping, fingers clawing into the dirt as she was pulled toward the crack in the stone I had emerged from. Her one good eye fixed on me, begging. Elias, I didn't hear it. I felt it. I sprinted, arm outstretched, lungs ripping under the strain. My fingers brushed hers for a fraction of a second, the only warmth I'd felt since stepping into California. Then she vanished into the dark, swallowed by the mine. I stood staring at the crack, chest collapsing in on itself. Every part of me screamed to go after her. This time, I wouldn't abandon her. This time, I wouldn't run. But the mountain vibrated with a warning. The creature was coming. Not rushing, not stumbling, declaring ownership. I staggered back, balance wavering near the ledge. Below, the land offered nothing but the promise of a deadly fall. Behind me, the mine promised a worse fate. My thoughts spiraled, desperate. If she was really alive, why now? Why here? Why not a scream, a word, a voice I knew? Because she couldn't. The thing had taken that too. Wind whipped cold against my face. The desert stared up like a witness demanding a verdict, and inside the mine, a sound erupted, a single sharp tap, like a knuckle on metal on an RV door. Then another. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming quietly anymore. I backed farther up the ledge and noticed something I hadn't before, carved into the stone wall, barely visible under moonlight. Help us. A dozen other scratches surrounded it. Names. Dates. Desperation etched into stone by hands that would never come home. Maya wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. A roar of rage bellowed through the mountain, deeper than anything alive, and dust exploded from the crack. A long, pale limb slipped out, reaching. Decision time had ended. I turned away, heart shredded, and ran along the ledge, searching for any path down, any slope that might lead me somewhere other than death. A narrow goat trail zigzagged along the cliff face. Loose rocks crumbled under each step. One wrong move and the desert would devour me. But behind me, the creature emerged, fully. Its body contorted through the opening, shoulders splitting stone as though rock meant nothing. Its head twisted, searching, hunting. For me, I ran harder. The trail ahead curved a steep drop, and beyond that, a darker patch of land, a ravine, or maybe a dry riverbed. Somewhere to disappear, somewhere to try again, somewhere I might have one last chance to save her. But the creature now moved fast, disturbingly fast, joints snapping forward like a puppet pulled by invisible strings, gaining on me with silent, monstrous ease. The moon slipped behind a cloud. Darkness became absolute. The only sound left in the world, my heartbeat and its pursuit. The trail dissolved beneath my boots, rocks tumbling into the void with every step I took. My lungs burned from the cold air cutting through them, but it wasn't the wind that made my breath stutter. It was the shadow stalking just out of sight behind me. Every few seconds, the monster's unnatural limbs clattered against the cliffside, too close, too fast. My mind fired warnings in every direction, but instinct pushed me down that treacherous slope, slipping and catching myself, because anything, even a fall, was better than its grip. The wind died suddenly. All sound died. Even my heartbeat seemed to hesitate. The silence was the creature's territory. I stumbled around a curve in the trail and froze. Ahead of me, a section of the narrow path had collapsed into a gap at least 6 feet wide. Beyond it, the trail continued, but the drop below was a grave waiting for me to slip. I skidded to a halt, stones scattering into the dark. I turned back. The creature was rounding the curve, its silhouette warping against the moonlight. No hesitation, no doubt. A nightmare carved from earth and bone, knowing the mountain better than I ever could. My fingers clenched around the hatchet. Useless, but not doing anything would be worse. My legs shook, failing to choose between jumping and fighting. Then the creature lunged, a stride too large for physics, its clawed hands smashing the rock where my chest had been a heartbeat before. I leapt. For a moment, all sensation left me, just weightless terror hanging above a drop that could erase me from the world without trace. My chest slammed into the opposite ledge. Air shot out from my lungs. My fingers clawed at brittle rock. Pebbles broke loose. My boots swung in empty air. Below, darkness waited to collect me. The cliff's edge crumbled under my grip. I scrambled desperately, my fingernails peeling back against stone. A guttural vibration traveled through the rock. The creature was already preparing to cross. It wouldn't jump. It would crawl. I glanced up and saw a broken metal stake hammered into the stone, probably from an old climbing line, just barely within reach. I made a sound, some ugly mix of a sob and a growl, and threw my arm upward. My palm slapped metal. Pain flared, but I held on. With a final surge, I hauled myself up, chest scraping against rock until I was fully on the ledge again. I turned just in time to see the creature entering the gap, head first, arms elongating, spine bending like ropes being pulled taut. It wasn't jumping. It was bridging the chasm with its own body. The mind had shaped it into a thing that could go anywhere in these mountains. I staggered away, half rising, half crawling along the trail until my feet found the ground enough to run again. The slope steepened. The land dropped towards sagebrush and boulder fields below. My legs obeyed panic more than muscle memory. Behind me, a sickening crack of stone splitting. It was gaining again. I slid down loose scree, skidding sideways to avoid tumbling headfirst. Gravel grated deep into my palms, my shins banged against rock. The sage at the bottom of the slope rose fast to meet me, too fast, and I crashed into it with a brutal roll that knocked stars into my vision. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The night swam above me in fractured pieces, then a distant sound cut through everything. Tap, tap, tap on metal, my RV, my last refuge, my last mistake. I forced myself upright, every cell screaming in revolt. The silhouette of the RV shimmered in the moonlight across the open plain. Too far away, but the only thing left. I ran. The flats offered no cover. My legs churned through gritty sand and stubborn brush. Each breath tasted like metal and old fear. I glanced back only once. It was descending the slope like an avalanche made of limbs. Its hunger was momentum. My chest felt like it was splintering from the inside, but I kept pushing. The RV grew closer, its shape gaining detail. The ladder, the rooftop rack, the dent on the side from a careless parking job months ago. Familiarity that suddenly felt like hope. Tap, tap, tap from the other side of the vehicle. I circled wide, terrified of what I might see knocking from the dark. But nothing stood there. It was mocking me, using memory against reason. I fumblingly yanked the door open, dove inside, and slammed the deadbolt home. The metal clunk sounded like a prayer that had lost its faith. I stumbled to the bedroom nook and ripped open the emergency storage, hands searching blindly. My fingers brushed cold steel. A flare gun. Not a weapon meant to kill, but maybe one meant to survive. I gripped it like a lifeline. Silence again. The creature had paused. Suddenly, thud. Its weight hit the side of the RV, the entire frame groaning. Thud. Metal popped and the walls trembled. The cabinets rattled, dishes clinking like bones in celebration. Something dragged across the roof, the scraping of nails long enough to pierce memory. I crouched behind the kitchenette, flare gun aimed at the door, breath tight as wire. Then, a sound that turned my bones to ice. A single word, whispered through the metal. Elias. Her voice. Perfect. Untouched by death. The mountain hadn't trapped Maya's body alone. It had stolen her voice, and now it wore her memory like bait. The doorknob twisted, the deadbolt strained. My hand shook violently. A flare gun was a weapon of desperation, loud, messy, unpredictable. If I missed, the next thing I'd feel would be its hands closing around my throat. The door groaned inward. The bolt bent. Light from outside poured through a growing crack. Moonlight illuminating a portion of the creature's arm, forcing its way inside. It moved like it was unraveling itself, bone detaching and reattaching to fit through. I lifted the flare gun, finger trembling on the trigger. Maya's voice again, "Don't leave me." My vision swam. The RV tilted. Guilt pounded like a second heartbeat, forcing the same choice upon me that had broken my life once before. Face the monster, or flee the woman I loved again. Thud. The door burst inward halfway, showering screws across the floor. It squeezed further inside, head twisting unnaturally, those white, pupilless eyes gleaming with hunger or hate or something too alien for either. My finger closed on the trigger. Please. My breath shattered. The flare fired. A shriek like a collapsing world tore through the night, the flare hurling into its face, embedding in flesh that didn't bleed right. Fire burst across skin that cracked like stone and pulsed like muscle. It reeled back with violent speed, slamming into the sand outside, flailing in a burning spiral. I didn't watch more. I didn't breathe. I didn't think. I sprinted to the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared awake. Tires spun. Dirt exploded behind me as the RV lurched into the dark. I didn't look in the mirrors. I couldn't look. If I did, I'd see her. That broken body dragging behind the creature, eyes glassy and pleading. Alive or dead, I didn't want the answer. The road appeared like a lifeline across the desert. The RV sped forward, rattling, groaning, begging me not to stop. The mountains shrank behind me, but the fear didn't. Nothing was truly left behind. Not her. Not what I'd done. Not what followed me out of that mine. Not California. The desert highway unfolded like a black ribbon ahead of me, cracked asphalt glowing in the pale starlight. The RV's headlights flickered every time I hit a bump, and each blink of darkness felt like a chance for the world behind me to rearrange itself, to bring the nightmare closer. The wheel shook under my hands. My pulse beat so violently it felt fused with the engine. I didn't slow down. Not for turns. Not for anything. The rearview mirror stayed tilted down. I refused to look at it. Refused to see what the dark might decide to show me. The thought of her face, pulled taut by something that had stolen her voice, if I saw that again, I wouldn't keep driving. The road stretched empty in every direction, the kind of emptiness that kills cell service and hope in equal measure. But the farther I got from those mountains, the tighter the tension wound inside me, because speed can't outrun memory. And I'd heard her voice again, clear enough to know the truth hurts worse when it sounds like love. I kept my eyes fixed forward until the headlights revealed something sitting in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes. Tires screamed. The RV fishtailed violently before skidding to a stop mere feet from the figure standing dead center in the lane. My breath froze in my chest. It wasn't the creature. It was a coyote, gaunt, fur-bristled, staring directly into the lights. Its eyes reflected a cold shimmer, unblinking. It didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared. I sat motionless, fingers digging into the wheel. Seconds stretched, heavy and wrong. Then, the coyote slowly turned its head toward the mountains, listening, waiting. A rumble rolled across the desert hills. Not loud, not yet, but deep. A vibration that felt too much like the mine collapsing all over again. The coyote bolted into the brush, vanishing like a warning too late. I shoved the RV into gear and tore forward again. The gas gauge hovered just under a quarter tank. Sweat plastered my shirt to my back despite the cold. I kept whispering to myself, not prayers, but bargains. Just get me to a town. Just one other person. Just something normal. But the night didn't offer normal anymore. Miles blurred. My eyelids stung from grit and terror. The first hint of dawn creased the sky behind me, painting the horizon with the faintest bruise of light. That should have comforted me. Instead, it reminded me that shadows only hide what daylight forces us to see. A roadside sign loomed ahead. Mogave Springs. 18 miles service. Food. Motel. Civilization. I almost cried. Then, tap. Soft. Deliberate. On the roof, I froze. The RV remained in motion, but my soul stopped. The tap came again, on the slower this time, like it wanted me to know it had no fear of the sun. Something shifted above my head, a weight that spread long like a creature stretching its limbs after a night's hunt. I forced myself not to look, not to react. If panic controlled me, that thing would peel me open and crawl inside the terror. Instead, I slowed. Smooth. Controlled. As if I had car trouble, not death hitching a ride. The tapping paused. Then, scrape! Metal screamed overhead as claws dragged backward across the roof toward the rear, the sound gouging fire into my nerves. The RV swerved as I fought the instinct to jerk away from the noise. The creature moved with purpose, crawling toward the back window. No. Toward the ladder. It was climbing down. My gut twisted into knots, sweat dripped into my eyes, my foot trembled on the pedal. I waited, breath locked tight for the next sound. Thud. On the back bumper. My heart blasted once, then stuttered. Everything inside me pleaded for the impossible, that this was a nightmare I'd wake from. But the thud came again. Heavier. It was testing the door, the same way it had tested the mine. My eyes flicked to the glove compartment. Another flare. One shot. If I pulled over, stepped out, and fired carefully, maybe I could end this. But then what? See your face again? Make the same decision all over? Survival isn't the same as living. I pressed the accelerator. The RV rumbled faster. The creature's grip dragged across the door, the hinges straining like they wanted to scream. I heard its breath this time, a low, rattling inhalation that sounded too much like someone learning how to breathe again. I hit 60, then 70. The wheels jittered over rough patches. The RV wasn't meant for this speed on roads like these. But I didn't slow. Not now. Not ever again. The service town came into view. A small spread of buildings, a gas station with flickering lights, a diner with a faded neon sign, a rundown motel leaning on the past. The first human place in what felt like years. If I could get there, if someone else saw this thing, maybe daylight would mean something again. Tap. On the window now, I looked. A hand. Long fingers flattened against the glass, joints bending at sharp angles, pressing a perfect smear of dust and something darker. The creature's head lowered into view, eye sockets fixed on me with hunger and possession. Its jaw hung wrong, like it was still learning to be a mouth. It wasn't waiting for the dark. It was wearing the day like new skin. The town line passed beneath the tires just as the rear door shuttered open an inch. A gasp of daylight cutting across that pale, awful arm. I swerved into the gas station lot and slammed the RV into park. The engine cut off, and the sudden silence was unbearable. I grabbed the last flare and kicked open the driver's door. A mechanic, half asleep and smoking beside the pumps, jolted upright at the sight of me. Wild, bloodied, flare raised like a warning shot. Call. The police. I gasped, coughing dust and memory. He stared past me. Not at me. At the RV behind me. A faint rasp scraped the gravel, the creature's first attempt at walking on open ground. Its silhouette slithered from the shadow of the RV, had got limbs rearranging under the new light. The mechanic's cigarette dropped to the ground. "What the hell?" he whispered, fear carving cracks into his voice. The creature paused, studying him, reading him, deciding if he was worth killing too. I raised the flare gun with shaking hands, ready to fire my last hope. The creature turned back toward the mine, no, toward the mountains, head tilting like it heard a distant call. like it remembered the darkness that made it. It backed away slowly, cautious, patient, not defeated, never defeated. It had all the time in the world. It slipped behind a building and vanished into desert shadow, quiet as bone dust. The mechanic grabbed my shoulders. Jesus, man, what was that? I didn't answer. There were no words. I looked down at my hand. The ring I'd picked up was gone, taken, reclaimed, or never real to begin with. The sun finally broke over the horizon, washing the world in gold. People stepped from motel rooms and diners and gas aisles into a morning that felt unaware of the night's hunger. The desert looked calm again, safe again. But I knew better. Some horror doesn't end. Some horror waits. Some horror follows. I turned away from the mountains, but they didn't turn away from me. Even here, even in daylight, I felt the weight of their darkness watching. I'm alive, but Maya isn't free, and I'm not safe. Not tonight, not tomorrow. And when the wind turns cold, when the world goes quiet, when metal groans under invisible weight, I know exactly what's tapping on people's doors out there, waiting to be let in. Never go RV camping in California, because sometimes you survive the night, but the night survives you. They say cold doesn't kill you quickly. It waits, patient as breath in a mirror, until you start making small mistakes. I learned that the hard way last winter, parked alone in my old Volkswagen camper on the edge of a forgotten campground near the Tetons. My name's Evan, 38. I've been living on the road for 4 years, chasing the quiet places most people avoid. But that night, the silence wasn't peace. It was a warning I didn't understand yet. I remember the snow starting early, thick and silent, like it was falling from a higher sky. The road had been empty for miles, not a single headlight behind me since I left the main highway. My breath clouded inside the van as I drove, the heater coughing lukewarm air, that old metallic smell mixing with the scent of damp wool and gasoline. I told myself I'd just camp for one night, test my new insulation setup, and maybe record some footage for my channel. But deep down, I think I wanted to prove something, to the cold, to myself, that I could handle it. When I finally pulled into the small clearing that passed for a campground, everything looked frozen mid-breath. The picnic tables, half buried in snowdrifts. The fire pits, filled with ice. Even the signpost leaned slightly, its letters erased by frost. I killed the engine, and the quiet that followed felt like a held note. It pressed on my ears until I could hear my pulse. I stepped out and the air hit me like glass, sharp, absolute. My boots sank half a foot into powder. No wind, no sound, nothing, just the faint creak of trees somewhere beyond the clearing. I set up camp the way I always do. Routine keeps you sane when you're alone. Level the van, check the propane, crack a window just enough to vent moisture. But as the sky dimmed into that blue-black that comes before full night, I noticed something strange. The snow near the edge of the clearing looked broken. Not footprints exactly, more like someone had dragged something heavy through it, leaving a shallow, winding groove. It trailed from the tree line to the edge of the picnic table and then stopped. My rational mind kicked in. Maybe a fallen branch, maybe an animal. I didn't want to think too hard about how clean the edges of the trail were, or that there were no paw prints beside it. By 9, the temperature had dropped below 0. The cold became its own sound, a faint hiss inside my ears, the kind that makes you doubt you're hearing anything real. I wrapped myself in 2 layers of wool, sealed the windows, and turned off the lights to save power. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, my breath made tiny clouds that faded before I could see them. At first, I thought the tapping was just snow slipping off the roof. Then it came again, deliberate, rhythmic, like fingers drumming lightly on metal. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. I waited. The sound stopped. I told myself it was ice cracking from temperature drop. I didn't look out the window. I didn't want to. But around midnight, something changed. The air inside the van felt heavier, harder to breathe. My carbon monoxide detector was fine, heater off, vents open. Still, the air felt wrong. I checked my phone, no signal. Just that dull, emergency calls only in the corner of the screen. And that's when I heard the second sound. A low hum, not mechanical, not wind, almost like a distant voice carried through the cold. I leaned toward the window, squinting through the frost. The snow reflected the moonlight in a way that made everything shimmer slightly, like the world was underwater. And there, at the edge of the trees, I saw movement, a darker shape among dark shapes. I froze. The figure didn't move toward me, it just stood there, tall, motionless. My breath caught in my throat, clouding the glass. For a second, I thought it was another camper, someone who got lost, or maybe a ranger checking up. But no flashlight, no sound of boots on snow. And then, just like that, it was gone. I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, clutching my flashlight like it was a weapon. Every 30 minutes, I'd check outside. Nothing. Just the same broken trail in the snow and that wide, silent clearing reflecting the moonlight. But around 3 a.m., I noticed something else. My tracks, the ones from when I'd walked around earlier, were gone. Not covered by snow. Smoothed over. Perfectly flat. Like the ground had reset itself. I leaned forward, hands trembling, and whispered out loud just to hear my own voice. "It's fine. It's fine. It's fine." The words didn't sound like mine. That's the thing about cold. It doesn't just freeze your skin. It freezes your sense of what's real. You start to think you hear movement when you don't. You start to feel watched even when you're alone. But when the sun rose and I stepped out to check the trail again, I realized it wasn't imagination. The line in the snow, the one that looked dragged, was gone. In its place was something new, a long, narrow indentation circling my van. Perfectly round. No footprints in or out. Just a ring pressed into the snow like something heavy had moved slowly, deliberately around me while I slept. And the strangest part wasn't the shape. It was the warmth. When I touched the edge of that circle, the snow was wet, melted. I stood there, the morning light weak and pale, my breath rising in thin streams, and felt the fear start to bloom, not sharp, not immediate, but creeping like frost up a window pane, because there was no sun strong enough to melt that snow. Not that morning. Not in that cold. I told myself I'd pack up and leave as soon as I could, but when I turned to unlock the driver's door, the key jammed halfway. The lock was stiff, frozen solid. I tried the passenger side. Same thing. Even the sliding door in the back had frozen shut. I was trapped. Inside the van, the temperature had dropped fast. I started the engine, praying it would turn over. It coughed, stuttered, then caught. I let it idle, staring at the trees. The figure from last night didn't return, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just beyond what I could see. Waiting, quiet, patient. By noon, I'd made tea on the small stove and convinced myself the circle in the snow meant nothing. Maybe some natural effect, pressure from the van's heat overnight. Maybe my fear had magnified it. But when I stepped out again to double check, the circle wasn't there anymore. It had deepened. Now it looked like a groove, a shallow trench that went all the way down to the frozen earth. And at one point, near the rear tire, it split into two smaller lines, almost like hands. I stared at those markings until my eyes watered from the cold, until I couldn't tell if I was imagining the shape or if it was really there. Two smaller lines branching off the circle like something had dragged itself toward the van and stopped just shy of touching it. I knelt down to look closer, my knees sinking into the snow. The cold bit through the denim and the ground underneath felt soft. Not frozen, not solid, like the frost had been churned from underneath. Something was wrong with the snow itself. It looked like it had risen overnight, packed in uneven ridges, as if the earth had exhaled in its sleep. I don't know why I whispered then. Maybe I didn't want the sound to travel. What the hell is this? I should have left right then. Should have forced the locks open, smashed the ice off the hinges, done anything but stand there staring. But curiosity is a sickness when you're alone. You tell yourself you just need one more look, one more explanation, one more sign that it's all natural. That's how fear seduces you. It makes logic sound comforting. By the time I got back inside, my hands were numb, and my coffee had gone cold. I sat there in the driver's seat, heater blowing on high, trying to calm the tremor in my jaw. The clock on the dash said 12:24. but the sun hadn't moved. It was still sitting low, pale as a dead eye, like morning refused to end. I remember thinking maybe my clock had frozen too. When I picked up my phone, it read 4:13, then 2:47. Then it blinked out completely. The van's heater sputtered once and died. No smell of fuel, no warning light, just silence. I tried the key. Nothing. Battery dead. My whole world went still. No hum, no warmth, just me and that frozen clearing surrounded by pine shadows. That's when I saw the first prints. They were small, shallow, bare feet. Not animal, not boots. Human. Circling around the van, pressed deep into the new snow that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. They were uneven, like whoever made them had been dragging one foot. I followed them with my eyes, tracing the half circle around the rear bumper until they disappeared behind the trees. Something moved in that darkness. I swear I saw it. A flicker of motion like a figure too thin to be human, pale against the black bark. But when I blinked, it was gone. I closed the curtains, every single one. Sat there in the dim light, counting my breaths, watching the frost creep along the glass. I told myself I'd wait until the afternoon warmed up, maybe get the van started once the engine thawed. But no afternoon came. The light stayed flat, gray, endless, the kind of light that doesn't belong to any time at all. Then came the tapping again. 3 knocks on the side panel. Pause. 3 more. Same rhythm, same deliberate patience. I froze mid-breath. It wasn't wind. The air outside was dead still. Every instinct screamed at me not to move, not to make a sound. And then, from the opposite side of the van, came another set of knocks, slower, closer to the window behind my head. Tap, tap, tap. I turned slowly, not wanting the movement to make noise. My reflection stared back from the frosted glass, gray, wide-eyed, breath-shaking. I wiped a small circle clear with my sleeve, peered out, and felt my throat close. There was something standing just beyond the ring of snow. Its outline was faint, like it was half swallowed by the falling white. I couldn't see its face. Only the way it tilted its head, jerky, unnatural, like a puppet's string had just been pulled. I stepped back. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I fumbled for my flashlight, flicked it on, and shone it through the window. The beam hit nothing. The figure was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe it had never been there. Maybe my mind was breaking from the isolation, from the cold pressing too long against my skull. But when I turned the flashlight toward the ground, I saw them. Fresh prints, bare, wet, leading right up to the van's side panel. And next to them, something else. A handprint. No glove, no shoe, just the mark of fingers pressed flat into snow. But it wasn't right. The fingers were too long, too thin, and there were 6. I backed away, knocking over my mug. The sound shattered the stillness. I could feel my pulse in my temples. Every instinct screamed at me to start the van, get out, do anything. I twisted the key again. Nothing. The lights flickered once, then died completely. Outside, the knocking changed. It moved around the van, quick, circling, like it was testing each wall, each door. A low scrape followed, nails or claws dragging along the metal skin. I grabbed my knife. It felt useless. What good is a blade against something you can't see? The sound stopped. Silence filled the space again, thick and suffocating. I waited. 1 minute. 2. My breath echoed in the small cabin. I almost convinced myself it had gone until the van shifted, just slightly. A faint tilt like something had leaned its weight against the rear bumper. The suspension groaned. Then again, a push. Harder. The mugs on the counter rattled. My whole world was that sound, that pressure. I lunged forward, slammed my hand on the horn. Nothing. Dead battery. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the van went still. I waited. Minutes. Maybe longer. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I finally dared to open one curtain, just enough to see. The prints were gone. The snow was smooth again, untouched, except for one thing. On the windshield, written perfectly in the condensation from inside, were 3 words. Let it in. The letters glistened as my breath hit the glass. They were written from the outside. That broke something in me. Fear turned to panic, raw and electric. I tore open the back door latch, slamming my shoulder against the frozen seam until it cracked open enough for me to squeeze through. The air hit me like knives. I stumbled out, gasping, boots sinking deep into the circle of churned snow. For a split second, the world was painfully quiet again. Then I heard it, a long exhale behind me, near the van. Not quite human, not quite animal, just a breath, steady and cold. I didn't look back. I ran. Branches clawed at my jacket as I bolted through the tree line, snow up to my knees, my lungs burned. Every sound in that forest seemed alive. The creak of trees, the whisper of snow, even the sound of my own heartbeat echoing back from somewhere ahead. I didn't stop until I reached a frozen creek, half buried under snowdrifts. I knelt beside it, chest heaving, trying to think. No signal, no road in sight, only white, only silence. And then, faintly from far behind me, came the sound of my van's engine turning over. It coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. I hadn't touched the key. That sound, my van's engine roaring through the forest, didn't belong there. It cut through the stillness like something tearing open the air itself. I froze beside the creek, breath steaming out in quick bursts, every instinct screaming to stay low, to stay hidden. But then the headlights flared to life, white light flickering through the trees. The engine revved again, uneven and feral, like a living thing trying to find its rhythm. The driver's side door opened and slammed shut on its own. Then the van started to roll forward. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. The van moved through the clearing with that same patient rhythm I'd heard in the tapping. 3 bursts forward, pause, 3 more. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. The circle it made in the snow deepened with each pass, grinding down into the earth like it was tracing something ancient, something practiced. I should have run the other way, but my mind, half mad from cold and exhaustion, thought of my camera gear, my emergency beacon, my maps. Everything I needed to survive was in that van. So I did the worst thing possible. I went back. The closer I got, the less it looked like my van. The headlights pulsed like breathing, dimming and swelling, the beam bending in ways light shouldn't bend. Inside the windshield, I thought I saw a figure in the driver's seat. Someone slumped forward, both hands on the wheel. But it wasn't me. The shape was stretched. Thin arms, long neck, face pressed to the glass like it was testing how much it could look human. I took 1 step closer, boots crunching on the frozen ground, and the engine cut off instantly. The lights died. Darkness swallowed the clearing again. The silence that followed was worse than the sound, because now I could hear something else, the faint, steady rhythm of breathing coming from inside the van. Not the mechanical hiss of heat or wind. Real breathing. Wet, close, human. I called out before I could stop myself. "Who's in there?" No answer. Just a shift of shadow inside. I gripped the handle, my fingers trembling, and pulled the door open an inch. The warmth hit me first. Impossible, suffocating warmth rolling out into the cold. My breath fogged instantly. Inside, the air shimmered like heat over asphalt. My sleeping bag was unzipped, hanging open, and something was lying inside it. I thought it was a trick of light. The shape was perfect, my shape. My jacket, my boots, my hat pulled low over my face. But when I reached forward and brushed the edge of the bag, the thing inside twitched, slowly. A long, dragging inhale followed, and the body rolled toward me. The face staring back was mine. Not exactly. The skin was gray, cracked with frost. The lips were black from cold, but they moved soundlessly, shaping words I couldn't hear. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut, my hand numb from the handle. The sound inside the van changed. It wasn't breathing anymore. It was knocking. From inside. Tap, tap, tap. Faster. Desperate. Like something trying to get out. I ran. Again. This time I didn't look back. My lungs burned like fire in my chest. I followed the frozen creek, hoping it would lead me toward a road, a ranger station. Anything human. The light was dimming fast, but not because of sunset. The sky itself seemed to darken from above, clouds thickening until it looked like night had collapsed early. The cold chased me like a living thing, seeping through my clothes, through my skin, into my bones. My fingers stopped responding. My knees buckled with every other step. I didn't even realize I'd fallen until I saw my breath misting up against the ice only inches from my face. That's when I saw it again, reflected in the ice beneath me, Not my face, but the other one. The one from the van. Lips blue, eyes hollow, but alive in the reflection. It mouthed something slowly, over and over. Stay warm. I scrambled back, slipping, scraping my palms against ice. My flashlight flickered and died. All I had left was the gray wash of half-light from the storm above. The air vibrated around me, like the forest itself was humming under the snow. I knew then that I wasn't supposed to be there, that maybe no one ever was. The ground beneath me shifted, a low crack, a deep groan, the ice split. I threw myself sideways just as part of the creek caved in, swallowing the spot where I'd been kneeling. From the opening rose a breath, not steam, not mist, but breath, warm, human breath from the earth itself. That's when I understood. The warmth in the snow that morning, the melted ring, the voice in the wind, it wasn't trying to freeze me. It was trying to pull me down, to replace me. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, and ran again. This time I followed the tree line, half blind, until a faint orange light flickered between the trees. Firelight. I nearly cried when I saw it. A ranger's outpost, maybe. A cabin. I didn't care. When I reached it, I collapsed at the door, pounding with what little strength I had left. The wood creaked, and a man opened it. A ranger, his beard frosted white, eyes wide. He pulled me inside without a word. The warmth hit me like a wall. "Jesus, son," he said, pressing a blanket around me. "You're lucky I saw your tracks. Nobody camps out here this time of year." I nodded, unable to speak. My body shook so hard the mug of coffee he handed me rattled in my hands. He looked out the window toward the forest. "You were parked in that old clearing, weren't you?" I nodded again. His face went pale. "That ground's been unstable for years. Whole creek collapsed under it last winter. Buried a camper alive, poor bastard. They never dug him out. People say you can still hear him breathing when it warms up." I stopped shaking. The mug slipped slightly in my hands. What did you just say?" He didn't meet my eyes, just stirred his coffee. "I said you're lucky. Cold like this kills fast. You start hearing things before it does." I sat there for a long time, staring at the window. Snow falling, soft and endless. But just before dawn, when the ranger turned off the lantern and I was drifting in and out of half-sleep, I saw something outside. Through the frost-covered glass, standing beside the dark outline of my van, was a figure. He was dressed exactly like me. Same hat, same jacket, same way of standing. And when the wind brushed the frost from the window for just a moment, I saw his breath fog the glass, and it spelled out 3 words I'll never forget. "Let me in." That was last winter. I don't camp alone anymore. Not in the cold, not ever again. You think you understand what loneliness does to you until the cold starts whispering your name back, until you see your reflection breathing without you. So if you're out there, if you think winter camping makes you stronger, freer, more alive, remember this. The cold doesn't just take warmth. It takes identity. It'll make a version of you that doesn't need fire, food, or fear. A version that waits in the snow long after your body gives out. And someday, when another traveler parks in that same clearing, it'll be you tapping on their window, asking to be let in. I always thought that driving through the high desert in my old Volkswagen camper was the kind of solitude I needed. That gentle hum of the road under the tires, the dry wind pressing against the windows, the smell of dust and sagebrush pouring through the open vents, it was peace. Or at least, that's what I told myself when I left Reno that morning, heading south toward Tonopah. I wasn't chasing a destination anymore. I just wanted stillness. Space to clear the noise that had been building in my head for months. The first half of the day was golden and quiet. Long roads that looked like stretched ribbons over the hills. I stopped a few times just to step out, listen to the stillness, and let the heat bite at my skin. Out here you could see the land breathe. The mirage lines shimmered and faded, and the distant mountains looked like half-forgotten ghosts of their former selves. It was just me, my Volkswagen, and miles of nothing. Somewhere past Goldfield, I saw a faded sign for an old RV park, a rusted metal frame leaning into the wind. The lettering had peeled away, but I could still make out the faint words, Silver Sky Campground. The turnoff led down a dirt road that looked like it hadn't been used in years. That was exactly the kind of place I loved. Quiet, forgotten, a piece of someone's story left behind. I took it slow, my Volkswagen bouncing on the uneven ground, the suspension squeaking in protest. The sun was beginning to sink, and the whole desert glowed this bruised orange that made everything feel both alive and dead at once. I remember thinking it was beautiful, the way the light caught the dust in the air like glitter in a dying fire. The campground appeared like a mirage at first. A few cracked concrete pads, the skeletons of old RVs, and what looked like a small building, maybe a communal bathroom or office. A row of broken light poles lined the edge of the lot, their wires hanging loose like veins exposed to the dry air. I parked near the center, cut the engine, and let the silence fall over me. It wasn't total silence, though. Out here, silence has texture. You can hear the faint hum of wind through hollow metal, the dry rattle of something small moving across the gravel, the occasional whine of the van's cooling engine. But beneath all that, I started to sense something heavier, like the land itself was listening. I stepped out, stretched, and walked toward the small building. The sign above the door had fallen halfway off, but I could still read the words, "Office, check in here." The doorknob turned easily, and the smell that poured out hit me hard, dust, mildew, and something faintly sweet like fruit left too long in the sun. Inside, the place looked frozen in time. A few papers still sat on the counter, sun-bleached and brittle. A corkboard on the wall was full of faded Polaroids, families smiling beside their RVs, kids holding fishing poles, couples sitting under string lights. There were dozens of them, all tacked in uneven rows. But what caught my attention was the message written across the bottom of one of the photos in red ink. It said, "Last night before the lights went out." I looked closer, but the ink had bled and cracked over time. The faces in the photo were barely visible. The desert had eaten away at them. I backed away, brushed off the feeling that crept up my neck, and told myself it was nothing. Just history. Just the remnants of people who'd moved on. Back at my van, I set up camp. Folding chair, small fire pit, a can of chili warming on the flame. The air cooled fast after sunset, the desert switching moods as it always does. The wind started to whistle low, sliding through the empty park like it was searching for something. That's when I first noticed it, the flicker of a light maybe 2 sights down from mine. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the fire reflecting off something metallic. But then it pulsed again, soft, erratic, like the glow of an old lantern. I remember squinting, trying to make out a shape. There was no RV there, just one of the cracked concrete pads, a rusted post with a broken plug box, and a few scattered beer cans that looked ancient. The light blinked again, once, then twice. I told myself it could be my firelight bouncing off the broken glass, or maybe a reflection from my van's chrome trim. But the timing didn't fit. It was deliberate, like someone signaling. I stared for a long while until the cold started to bite my fingers. Then I decided to let it go. People camp in weird places all the time. Maybe someone else had pulled in after dark. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, the fire was down to embers and the desert was black and endless. No sounds except the faint groan of the van's frame settling with the night temperature. I cracked a window for air and stared at the roof, trying to let the quiet lull me to sleep. Somewhere around midnight, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't loud, just a soft, rhythmic tapping. Not on the van, but somewhere close. I held my breath, listening. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. I reached for my phone to check the time, 12:42 a.m. No signal. Of course. I thought about turning on the van's lights, but something in me said to stay still. It was the kind of instinct you can't explain. You just know that moving would make things worse. The tapping continued for a while, moving slowly around the edges of the campsite. I couldn't see anything through the window. The night outside was pitch black. Then the sound stopped. For a few seconds there was nothing. Just that thick desert silence again. I was about to exhale when I heard it. A low, drawn-out scrape like metal dragging over concrete. It came from where I'd seen the flickering light earlier. I sat up, every sense on edge. My pulse was in my ears. The scraping grew louder, then stopped suddenly, as if whoever or whatever was making it realize I was awake. The air in the van felt heavier, like something unseen had leaned against it. I whispered to myself that it was just the wind. That's all. Just the wind shifting old metal. But deep down, I didn't believe that. A minute later, a faint knock echoed from the rear panel of my van, once. Then silence. Then again, 2 quick knocks and 1 long. I froze. Every hair on my body stood up. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The night had gone completely still outside. Even the wind had stopped. I waited, listening. No footsteps, no voices, no sound at all. Finally, I whispered, barely audible, "Who's there?" Nothing. I slowly reached for the flashlight near my sleeping bag, clicked it on, and pointed it toward the back window. For just a split second, I saw something, a reflection, or maybe a face, pale, colorless, gone before my brain could even process it. I jerked the flashlight away, my hands shaking. When I looked again, there was nothing there. Just my own reflection, staring back, wide-eyed and trembling. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, that my mind was playing tricks. But then I noticed something else. On the inside of the window, right where the condensation had gathered from my breath, were 3 finger marks. Clear as day. They weren't mine, and they were on the inside. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. I just stared at those 3 streaks, my breath fogging the glass again, making them shimmer faintly in the beam of my flashlight. My first thought was that I'd touched it without realizing, that maybe in my half-sleep I'd reached out toward the window. But when I lined my hand up against the marks, they didn't match. These fingers were longer, thinner, like someone had dragged them slowly down from the top of the glass. A cold pulse spread through my chest. I told myself, again, it had to be something rational. Maybe the condensation had run in streaks that happened to look like prints. Maybe my mind was finding patterns where there were none. But I couldn't bring myself to wipe them away. I turned off the flashlight, hoping the darkness would make me feel hidden again. But that just made the silence louder. The desert outside was dead still, like the whole world had been unplugged. Not even the crickets dared to make a sound. I lay there in the van, heart hammering, listening for any movement. Every creak of the metal shell felt amplified. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps that weren't really there. I tried to steady my breathing, counting seconds, but the stillness pressed harder, like the air itself wanted me gone. At some point, I must have drifted in and out of a light, restless sleep, because when I opened my eyes again, it was 2:17 a.m. I knew because the clock on my dashboard was glowing faintly in the dark. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face. My mouth was dry. The air in the van felt colder than it should have been. That's when I heard it again. This time, not a knock or a scrape. A hum. It was faint, almost inaudible at first, like electricity running through an old wire. It came from somewhere beyond the campsite, near the office building I'd explored earlier, a low, vibrating tone that seemed to drift on the air, almost rhythmic. I couldn't tell if it was mechanical or human. I sat frozen, trying to place it. Then, faintly, the light returned. The same soft, erratic flicker I'd seen earlier, pulsing near the far concrete pad. But this time, there were 2 of them. One steady, one moving. I pressed my forehead to the glass and squinted. The lights swayed side to side, not like flashlights, but like lanterns being carried slowly through the dark. I couldn't see who or what was holding them, but they moved with purpose. For a moment, I considered turning on the van and driving straight out of there, but the road was rough, and the last thing I wanted was to get stuck in a ditch with those lights coming closer. So instead, I stayed quiet, watched, waited. Then something strange happened. The humming stopped. The lights froze, and from the direction of the office, I heard a single high-pitched sound, like a metal hinge crying out. The office door, maybe. A second later, the flickering lights both went out. Gone. I waited for them to come back, but the darkness held. My pulse pounded so hard it felt like I could hear it in my ears. I reached for the ignition, ready to start the van, when a sudden noise made me jolt. A voice. It wasn't close, but it carried over the flat desert air, a faint call, half swallowed by the wind. I couldn't make out the words at first, but it came again, clearer this time. Hello? Anyone out there? It was a man's voice, hoarse, uncertain, like someone who'd been yelling for a while. I didn't answer. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Something about the tone didn't feel right. It wasn't panic. It was something else. Too slow. Too careful. Hey, the voice called again, closer now. You all right in there? I reached over and locked the doors. The click sounded too loud in the still air. Then came the sound of footsteps on gravel. Measured, uneven, like whoever it was dragging one foot slightly behind the other. They stopped somewhere near the front of my van. The shadow of movement brushed across the windshield, and I saw the faint outline of a man, tall, wearing what looked like a jacket and hat. I couldn't make out his face, but he leaned slightly toward the driver's side window. Didn't mean to scare you, he said. His voice was calm now, too calm. Wasn't sure if anyone was still out here. I didn't respond. My hand hovered over the ignition. He took a small step closer. You okay? You look like you've been here a while. I glanced toward the rear window. The condensation marks were still there. 3 long streaks, faint but visible. Something about them made me feel like I shouldn't answer. I'm fine, I finally said, my voice trembling despite me trying to sound steady. Just camping for the night. He tilted his head slightly like he was listening to something far away. Didn't think anyone came here anymore, he said. Not since, well, you know. I didn't know, and I didn't ask. The silence between us stretched. He shifted his weight, the gravel crunching under his boots. I saw him glance toward the old office, then back at me. You should probably get going before morning, he said finally. Things get strange around here when the power's off. The power? I asked, instantly regretting that I'd spoken again. He nodded, slow. Yeah, the power. It never really came back on. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and started walking toward the office building. Not hurried, just a steady, dragging pace. The beam of my flashlight caught him for a second through the windshield, and what I saw made my stomach twist. He wasn't wearing shoes. His feet were bare, coated in dust up to his ankles. He disappeared around the side of the office, and the night swallowed him whole. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. A minute. Nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned the key, the Volkswagen's engine sputtering awake with that familiar coughing hum. I gripped the steering wheel, ready to pull out. But as soon as my headlights came on, I froze. Every Polaroid from the corkboard inside the office was now scattered across the ground outside. Hundreds of them, fluttering lightly in the breeze, glinting white in the headlights like teeth. And standing in the middle of them, barely visible at the edge of the light's reach, was that same man, still facing the office, his back to me, perfectly still. I threw the van into reverse, heart racing, tires crunching over gravel. I didn't stop to look back again. I hit the main road, the dirt giving way to cracked asphalt, and didn't ease off the gas until the old sign for Silver Sky Campground disappeared in my mirrors. I must have driven 15 miles before I let myself breathe again. The sky was just starting to pale in the east. I pulled over at a rest stop near an abandoned gas station and shut the engine off. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit there with them pressed against my knees to stop them. I told myself I'd imagined it. The lights, the man, the marks on the window. Maybe exhaustion had played tricks on me. But when I looked down at the dashboard, something caught my eye. A Polaroid. It was wedged between the vents, right above the radio. I didn't remember it being there before. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The photo was faded, but I could still make out the faint image of a Volkswagen van. My van, parked in that same cracked lot right beside the broken light post. And at the bottom, written in red ink that looked fresh despite the years, were the words, "Last night before the lights went out." For a long time, I just sat there, staring at that Polaroid. The early morning light was spilling over the desert, thin and pale, washing the world in a kind of hollow calm. I kept turning the photo over in my hands, feeling the faint texture of it, like I was afraid it might dissolve if I blinked. I knew it wasn't there before. I'd cleaned the dashboard earlier that day when I'd stopped for gas, brushed off the dust, adjusted the vents. There was no photo. There was no message. Yet somehow, between the moment I fled that park and now, it had appeared, waiting. The words in red ink seemed almost wet under the soft light. Last night before the lights went out, something about it made my chest tighten, not just out of fear, but out of this weird, heavy sadness I couldn't explain. Whoever wrote those words, whoever lived through that night, felt closer now, like I was treading through the same story, step by step, repeating a mistake someone else already made. I placed the photo gently on the passenger seat and stepped out of the van. The air was cold, crisp, and clean in that way only desert mornings can be. I could see the horizon stretching forever, unbroken except for a line of distant mountains and a few telephone poles that led toward nothing. Part of me wanted to just keep driving, put miles between me and that place, pretend it was just a bad dream. But the other part, the same one that made me chase the silence in the first place, wouldn't let it go. I needed to understand what had happened out there. So, against every sane impulse I had left, I turned the van around. The drive back felt longer than before. Every familiar bend in the cracked asphalt seemed sharper, every mile marker older. The desert didn't look warm anymore. It looked bleached, drained of life. The wind had picked up again, whispering through the cracks of the doors, and for a moment I thought I heard that same faint hum beneath it. By the time I reached the turnoff to Silver Sky Campground, the sun was high enough to make the road shimmer. The sign looked smaller now, half buried in sand. I slowed down, feeling a cold unease creep up my spine. The lot was empty when I rolled in. No man, no lights, no scattered Polaroids. Just the dry, abandoned shells of what used to be a place where families laughed, cooked, and watched sunsets together. The silence pressed hard again, thicker this time, as if it remembered me. I parked in the same spot as before. The concrete pad was still cracked down the middle, the same rusted power post leaning at an angle. For a long time I didn't get out. Then I saw something that made me freeze. The office door was open. Not wide, just enough for the wind to slip through and make that same faint metallic creak I'd heard in the night. My body moved before my mind could stop it. I grabbed my flashlight, even though daylight was pouring across the desert, and stepped slowly toward the building. The dust under my boots made almost no sound. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. The counter was bare, the corkboard empty. The Polaroids were gone. The sunlight came through a broken window, cutting across the room in harsh, thin lines. But there, in the far corner of the floor, something glinted. I knelt down. It was another photo. This one was face down, half covered in dust. When I turned it over, my stomach dropped. It was me, standing outside the van. From moments ago. I looked toward the window, my pulse spiking, half expecting to see someone out there. But the lot was empty. The air shimmered with heat and nothing else. I backed up, the photo still in my hand, and for the first time since I'd started this trip, I felt like I didn't know what was real anymore. When I stepped outside, something changed. The light looked off, too sharp, too white. The air didn't move. Even the sound of my footsteps felt delayed, like an echo. I turned toward my van, and for a moment I could have sworn there was someone standing beside it, a shape, thin, motionless, watching, but when I blinked, it was gone. That's when the hum started again, low, pulsing, like the land itself had started to breathe. It rose from underneath the ground, vibrating through my shoes, through the cracked pavement, through the air. I could feel it in my teeth. The sound pulled my eyes toward the far end of the lot, toward the old bathhouse I hadn't noticed before. The roof was half collapsed, the door hanging crookedly on its hinges, and from inside, faintly, I saw the flicker of light. That same erratic pulse. I should have left. I know that, but fear has this strange way of becoming fascination when it's all you've got left. So I started walking, The closer I got, the stronger the hum became. It wasn't mechanical anymore. It sounded alive, like a voice buried under layers of soil, murmuring too low to make out the words. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick, stale, and cold. The light came from a single, ancient bulb swaying gently above one of the sinks, still connected to a wire that shouldn't have had power. Beneath it, the mirror was shattered in a spiderweb pattern, and in the center of that web, someone had written 3 words in the dust: "We never left." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the cracked tile. My flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. The bulb overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied, and for a heartbeat, I saw them. Reflected in the broken glass, dozens of faint, colorless faces. Men, women, children. Not moving, not blinking. Just there. Watching. The light snapped off. I bolted for the door, crashing into the frame, slamming my shoulder hard enough to send pain down my arm. The hum grew louder behind me, rising into a sound that was almost a scream. I hit the open air, running. The world outside felt warped, the sky too bright, the ground too dark. I sprinted toward the van, fumbling for my keys. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped them twice before I finally jammed one into the lock. The door opened. I threw myself inside, started the engine, and peeled out of that lot so fast I barely felt the wheels hit the dirt. As the van roared onto the main road, I looked once in the rearview mirror. The campground was gone. Not smaller, not fading, just gone. Where the road should have led into that dusty lot, there was nothing but open desert, smooth and untouched, like no one had ever built anything there at all. I drove for hours that day without stopping. Didn't eat, didn't think. I just kept the van moving until the sun dropped behind the mountains. By nightfall, I found myself parked outside a rest stop near Beatty. I sat on the ground beside the van, feeling the coolness of the metal against my back, staring up at a sky full of stars. That's when I realized something that chilled me even more than the faces or the photos. The van's odometer hadn't moved. No matter how far I'd driven, it showed the same mileage as when I'd first entered Silver Sky Campground. And when I checked the clock on the dashboard, it still read 2:17 a.m. The same moment I'd first heard the hum. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I just lost time. But when I opened my eyes again, the sun was up, the air warm, the world silent again. The van started fine, the mileage was normal, the clock was correct. Everything looked ordinary, except for one thing. On the passenger seat, where I'd left that first Polaroid, was a new one. This time it showed me sitting at the rest stop, the same angle I was looking from now, head tilted up toward the stars, a small fire beside me. But behind me, faintly visible in the glow, was the outline of a row of broken light poles. And in red ink, scrawled across the bottom, were the words, "We told you to leave before morning." The sun had already risen high by the time I realized I'd been sitting there for hours, the second Polaroid resting in my hands. My coffee from the gas station had gone untouched. The highway stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of cracked asphalt leading into heat haze. I kept staring at that photo, the one showing me sitting at the fire, the broken light poles behind me that weren't really there. I looked around, half expecting to see them materialize out of the sand, but all I saw was emptiness, desert wind, a single tumbleweed cutting across the road like it had somewhere important to be. It's strange how quickly your sense of what's real begins to unravel once you've seen something that shouldn't exist. I'd always thought the world was solid, predictable. That fear belonged to the dark, to campfire stories, to moments we could rationalize afterward. But this felt different. It was like the world had cracked somewhere and I'd slipped through the seam. I thought about what the man had said. Things get strange when the power's off. I replayed his words over and over, trying to understand what they meant. Maybe he wasn't warning me about literal power. Maybe he meant something deeper. That once the light leaves a place, the dark doesn't just fill it. It remembers. When I finally started the van again, the engine caught with its usual hum, familiar and comforting. That sound had always been my companion, my proof that I wasn't alone, but this time it felt fragile, like the motor itself didn't trust the road ahead. I decided not to go south again. Instead, I drove west, into the hills, where the land broke apart into stretches of volcanic rock and old mining claims that hadn't seen life in decades. I thought distance would help, that if I kept moving, the desert would eventually forget me. But that night, when I stopped at a small rest area near an abandoned diner, I saw it again. A flicker. Not in the desert this time, but inside the van. The reflection in the windshield pulsed faintly, like the echo of a candle flame. It came from the passenger seat, where the Polaroids lay. I turned off the lights, and for a second, everything was quiet. Then the van's radio clicked on by itself, white noise at first. Then the faint hum, the same low vibration I'd felt beneath my feet back at Silver Sky. I froze. The hum rose, built into something that almost sounded like words buried in static. I turned the dial, but every station was the same. Just that endless whisper, layered voices breathing through the static, the pitch rising and falling as if arguing. I pulled the key from the ignition, but the radio stayed on. The hum kept going. That's when I saw the Polaroids start to shift. Slowly, as if caught in a breeze that wasn't there, they slid across the seat, edges curling upward. One flipped over on its own. It was blank. Then, as I watched, faint shapes began to form. The outline of a van, the glow of a fire. And there, just beyond the frame, that same row of broken light poles. I snapped. I grabbed the photos, shoved them into the glove compartment, slammed it shut, and shouted, "Leave me alone." The hum stopped. For a moment, the silence was so sudden it made my ears ring. The radio went dead. The van sat still and quiet again, as if nothing had happened. I leaned forward, forehead against the steering wheel, trying to breathe. It was then, maybe because the adrenaline had finally drained, that I felt the weight of it all. Not just the fear, but the exhaustion, the emptiness that had followed me long before that night in the desert. I realized that I hadn't gone camping for peace. I'd gone to disappear, to be forgotten for a while. And maybe that's what the place had offered me, a version of oblivion that almost took me with it. I slept in the van that night anyway, though sleep isn't the right word for it. My dreams were flickering lights and voices calling from under the sand. When I woke just before dawn, the desert was cold and still. The glove compartment was open again, the photos gone. I didn't search for them. I just started the van, turned west, and drove until I hit the Pacific. There's a turnout off Highway 1, north of Morro Bay, a small cliff that overlooks the ocean. That's where I finally stopped. I parked facing the sea, the morning fog rolling in over the cliffs, the smell of salt and kelp thick in the air. The sound of the waves crashing below drowned out the hum that had lived in my head since that night. For the first time in days, I felt something close to calm. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the people in those Polaroids, the families smiling, the kids holding fishing poles, the couples framed by string lights. I wondered if they'd ever really left, or if the place had kept them frozen in that final night, their laughter trapped in the static of the desert wind. And I thought about the man with no shoes, about what he might have meant when he said, "Not since, well, you know." Maybe he wasn't warning me about ghosts. Maybe he was one. Maybe all of them were just echoes, pieces of memory that refused to fade because someone like me kept wandering in, giving them a reason to wake up. I still have the van. I've thought about selling it 100 times, but I never do. The nights are quieter now, though sometimes when I'm parked in the middle of nowhere and the wind changes direction, I swear I hear that faint hum again. Soft, patient, waiting. There's a part of me that wonders if the campground still exists somewhere, hidden in the folds of the desert like a mirage that only appears for those who need to see it. A kind of purgatory for wanderers who lose themselves between destinations. Every traveler I meet, every person chasing the silence, I tell them the same thing now. If you see a faded sign for Silver Sky Campground, keep driving. Don't turn down that road, no matter how quiet it looks, no matter how much you think you need that kind of stillness. Because some places don't want to be remembered. They just wait for the next lonely soul who mistakes their silence for peace. And when the power finally goes out, when the lights fade for good, you don't just lose sight of where you are. You forget you ever left. I know because sometimes when I wake up in the van just before dawn, I see a faint orange glow on the horizon. And for a few seconds, I can't tell if it's the sunrise or the lights coming back on at silver sky.